Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee with our head coach, Chad Timmerman.
Hi, buddy.
And our CEO, Nate Pearson, will be joining us soon. He's currently he's on the way, so we'll get him in here soon. This is where we answer all the triathlon and cycling-related questions that you submit at trainerroad.com/podcast. Thank you for doing that. We got a ton of questions this week and keep it going. I read through all of them and then put them together in this list every week. So quick note, we are on a Wednesday, but usually every Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific is when we record this podcast. And you can join us live on YouTube. And I know there are a lot of people that are going to be joining us now live on YouTube. So when you join us, please give a thumbs up for the video because that'll help a whole lot of other people see this video. The more thumbs up we have, the more circulation that sort of thing gets. So it's a big help for us for sure. So if you're watching now, thumbs up, even if you're watching after the fact. Chad, we have a number of different things to cover here. First one that we should cover some job postings. So we still have job postings up. You can go to trainerroad.com/jobs and for product marketing manager, for React and React Native engineers, which we're constantly hiring on those, C# engineer, and also if you're local to the Reno Tahoe greater area, we're also adding more to our customer support team. So you can apply for all of those positions online, once again at trainerroad.com/jobs. And we also have some releases that we should cover here. So on the race analysis side of things, producer Tucker has some race analysis hot in the oven right now. So it's going to be released here soon. And both of these are from Nate. So some of the races that we recorded, earlier this year in the summer, but we didn't get those ones out, and now they're going to be coming out. And then we're also going to be working on something that'll be kind of interesting, which we're basically going to show the finishes that made Nate go from Cat 5 to Cat 2 in a year. And then we'll put them all together, and we'll actually have like a whole playlist and everything else. So stay tuned. Nice. You can go to youtube.com/trainerroad and check that out. Basically, with all of the videos that you'll see in the Cat 5 to Cat 2 thing, you'll learn everything that Nate learned throughout that period. So it's kind of like a cool, fast tracking option.
That's cool. Time lapse almost.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Concentrated learning. The other thing is if you go to blog.trainerroad.com, we just released a blog post on one of our more popular videos that we did, which was Sprinting 101, How to Be Explosive, where we looked at Pete's form and then we looked at Nate's form and we analyzed the differences between the two. And we kind of came up with some key things on what to do when you sprint in order to try to really get more out of it. Because the main thing was Nate's a big guy, right? But his sprint numbers weren't where we would expect them to be. Yeah. And his sprint also, he said he felt like he lacked coordination in the sprint and that he couldn't get as much as he wanted out of it. So
yeah, there's a lot goes into a sprint, a lot more than people recognize.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that today too.
Yeah. Super complex. And even the process of going down and just narrowing down what we felt were principles that everybody could apply and then see some improvement. It's really hard to go through the motion. It's one of those things that some people just do and they don't think about it and they're able to make that happen, but it's not that easy for everybody. And everybody needs to hear it slightly differently, it seems, to understand.
It's like any lessons, ski lessons or something of that nature. And you throw too much information at a person at one time and it's kind of falls on deaf ears after a point, and then it's just a matter of confusion and nothing really takes hold.
Yeah, so we put together kind of this list of things where we really talk about and you can go to the blog post and check it out first. I would recommend that. But we basically talk about the position that you need to be in and some key little points on position that we didn't think about until we saw this. And then so some key points on body positioning. Then after the body positioning, how you have to maintain tension evenly throughout the whole body thereafter. And if you're in the proper position with tension throughout and that's maintained, then you're ready to apply force to the pedals. And then we talk about the coordination aspect of it. And then everything else just kind of falls into place. But one of the interesting points that we found with Nate, if you check out the video that you can see within that blog post and everything else on our YouTube channel, is that Nate had kind of a lack of tension in his core. And when he had a lack of tension through his trunk, then what happened is that his hips started to wobble quite a lot.
It wasn't really a closed loop.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like if you were to have a pole and you were trying to lift something up on the end of that pole, but then halfway through that pole, you made it a hose for just a short section. It'd be impossible to make that happen, right? It's when you introduce a void, then things start to just not function as they're intended to.
Yeah, breaks down.
So we were able to isolate that and check it out. It's really interesting. So, and I would recommend having somebody film you doing a sprint and then you can see it because, man, it's
a lot of information to be gleaned.
Yes, a ton.
You'd be surprised. Same with explosive lifts, Olympic lifts. You may think you're doing it right. Someone may describe something. You may feel like you nailed exactly what they just described, and then you see it on video, and you look how awful. Yeah, the fact that you didn't get any aspect of what they described quite right.
Exactly. Yeah, so super interesting. And Megan, one of our awesome copywriters here, she's the one that wrote the blog post that kind of summarized what we talked about in that video. So go check that out. Give it a read. It's something that we should be working on, especially now is the time to be working on the sort of things of getting at least understanding and learning what you need to do in terms of technique for the season ahead. So this is when you lay the groundwork. Then one last bit of information before we get into one of the questions here is this is, if you go to forum.trainerroad.com, it's a lively community, a bunch of like-minded cyclists. And sometimes they do crazy things. And we should probably like preempt this. Joking around, no one should do this. Like we don't advocate this as like a solid training strategy in any way. But there's a workout called Disaster.
Fun event though.
Yeah,
potentially fun.
Particular
type of fun.
Yeah, there's a group workout called Disaster, and a bunch of crazy people on the forum have come together and decided that they want to all do it on Saturday, and they call it Worldwide Disaster Day. So,
and every year it leaves me both baffled and amazed.
Exactly.
Baffled that anybody would want to do this workout, and amazed that anybody can do this workout.
Yep. Yeah. So this is something that I guess, Chad, we can kind of look at this like you look at, and right now, if you're joining us live, producer Tucker was just showing the workout, so you can see it there. This is a good example of when you have a huge day coming up. If you're in the middle of a training plan, you have to plan for this sort of stress.
Oh, yeah.
Like whether it's lopping off the workout that you had planned beforehand or afterward, right?
It's a kitchen sink workout, but it's basically and probably harder than a race.
Yeah. Super tough.
Seriously. And I know they did a half version of it, which is actually sensible.
Yeah.
The 4 hour or 4 hour 15 version of it.
It's crazy.
Not sensible.
Yeah, exactly.
It's ludicrous.
This does not have the Coach Chad stamp of approval as a good thing to do to make you faster in your training plan. But, whatever.
There are benefits to it.
Sure.
But, a lot of ways to go about those same benefits that aren't quite as miserable.
Yeah. So if you're interested in such things, you can head over to forum.trainerroad.com and you'll be able to see it and join some others in some suffering. Cyclocross Nationals is going on right now, which is pretty exciting up in the Pacific Northwest here in the United States. And we have a question that applies directly to this from Corey. Perhaps indirectly, but we'll definitely tie it toward this. So he says, your podcast checks all the boxes. It entertains during long training rides and educates me to hopefully have the best season ever. I race mountain bikes as a Masters Cat 2 racer, and most races start fast and furious, leaving me behind. Depends on how long the race is, but somewhere about halfway through, I start catching up and passing guys. I sometimes feel like if the race was a little longer, I place higher or maybe even get a win. That's like the plight of many a cyclist that joins cyclocross races, right?
Man.
Especially because they are so short, so it's tough to be able to...
You don't get a good start. Oof.
Yeah, it's hard. So it says, my question is, what type of training would help me keep up with the fast guys and hopefully leave enough in the tank to finish strong? Any race strategy advice would be appreciated too. Most races are about 1.5 to 2.25 hours long. That's a really long cyclocross race. I've never heard of one that long, but who knows? Yeah. He says, I'm 5'9" at 139 pounds, so pretty lightweight.
Maybe that's a mountain bike race.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Hopefully that's the case. Last step test had me at 257 FTP and would love to get stronger and finally make the top step. Thanks, you guys rock. So I guess he's asking for training advice and then also like the strategy advice, I guess you could say, in terms of the starting side of things.
Yeah.
Where would you want to start out with this one?
Well, like I was saying, Corey, there's so many aspects of sprinting and people don't give it its due credit. And depending on the type of racing you do, I mean, if you're a long course triathlete, sprinting doesn't figure into your game plan at all. There are benefits to be gained from doing sprint training in your training, but you're never going to apply that sort of thing on the race course. Yeah. Whereas with mass start racers or mountain bike racers or cyclocross racers, and those all qualify as mass start too, it's hugely important. It is fundamental. And it's typically these sort of maneuvers and efforts that are make or break scenarios. Yeah. This is how you win races. This is how you establish gaps that are meaningful and lead you to a win or a smaller group at least. Yeah, there's two real main reasons to this that, like, let's say you're a long course triathlete, and I know a lot of people have always questioned this tactic from the outside in because they're kind of like, well, honestly, though, if you're to pace it evenly, it's probably faster. But there's two reasons why that kind of breaks with cyclocross races, especially amateur cyclocross racing. So amateur cyclocross racing is usually shorter than an hour, right? Yeah. So when you're talking less than an hour long, people can far outreach what their threshold is for that period of time. Certainly. And they can get away with a lot because the race is shorter. Yep. Secondly, it's because of the technicality and shape and size of the course. Bottlenecks hit. And then, so you end up debilitating bottlenecks.
Exactly right. So, and it's funny because sometimes you don't even realize they're slowing you down. Have you had this in cross where like you still feel like you're going at a decent clip, but you're not at the front. And then you realize once everything thins out, you realize
how far the front away is.
Yeah, and then you also realize how much faster I'm going through all of this stuff when I don't have people around me.
Oh yeah, this is kind of a side note. It's more of a strategy type thing, but it kind of builds on that. Is that I was watching Cyclocross Essen this weekend. Mariana Voss made her return. She got the whole shot. She got to lead into the first turn. Coming out of the first turn, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but it was an effective strategy. She laid off the gas for maybe a half extra second before she started her acceleration out of the turn. And as we all know, she accelerates incredibly well.
Yeah.
So she opened a gap anyway, but that the trickle down effect, the accordion effect it had, that half second gap, how far it carried back on the first turn made a difference that probably meant the people in the 20th and back weren't going to figure into that race.
They just had no chance.
Just from that one little thing, that one little lag.
Yeah. And that happens unintentionally. I mean, that's super. That's a good point. When you watch pro racers, they do a lot of things like that seem subtle. They're intentional.
Yep. Because it was the first turn and she was the focus, you could kind of see it happening. And again, it may have been unintentional, may have been very much intentional. She's a very strategic and cagey rider. Yep.
And then think about all of us average Joes and Janes. When we get out there and we race, we make a mistake all the time. Like we go up to the run up, and if there's an early run up in a course and we get off and we just fumble our way through it. As a result, that ends up causing that accordion effect that just it basically
everybody
eliminates
pays for it.
Yeah. So
and the farther back you are, the higher your cost.
Oh yeah. Super interesting point. That's a good observation. So where do we want to start with this?
Neither here nor there, just fun.
Sure. Yeah.
So first off, let's recognize the difference between being a protected sprinter and an unprotected sprinter. So unprotected, we're talking about most of the racing most of us do. You have the start sprint, you have mid-race sprints, and you have end-of-race sprints. Everything's in there. Whereas if you're a protected sprinter, basically you just have to hang on and do as little work as possible and let your team shelter you, let your team take care of you. Ideally, sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. Doesn't matter how strong or big a team you have behind you, doesn't always work, but a lot of the time it does, especially with higher echelon teams. So we're not really talking about the finish sprints so much as the ones that happen throughout a race and especially starting a race. But the training for them isn't a heck of a lot different anyway.
Right.
You just manage your resources differently over the course of a race.
Sure.
So really, one way to differentiate here is to see these as capacity versus power.
Right.
So in the case of someone who has to repeat sprints, it's very much about capacity. You need to be able to work at a high percentage of your sprint power again and again and again and again over the course of a race.
Like cyclocross?
Yep. And mountain bike racing and the like. And then with a power, when you're strictly focused on power, you simply want my highest 12 to 15 second power. That probably assumes that you're either a protected rider or you're the type of rider who's going to sit in as much of the race as possible, do as little work as possible, try to ride as smartly as possible, conserve as much as possible, such that when the final 500 to 200 meters rolls around, you've got as much snap as you can manage left.
Right. Yeah. So this is like the Cavendish, so to speak, would be like a good example of that, where he has a lead out train, all dedicated
or
to
he's really good at finding wheels and expending as little energy in the process.
Right. Cool. Yeah, makes sense.
So another way to put that is how quickly do you replenish your sprinting stores, and I'll dissect what those are in a minute, versus preserving full energy stores. So you either have to be able to recharge it really quickly, or you have to leave it untouched, untapped, so that when you finally do utilize it, it's all there.
Right.
So again, you won't train much differently in either case. You want to develop as much sprint power as possible, and then how you dole out that sprint or those sprints, largely based on tactics. You become if you're not protected, you become more of a responsive rider. You just have to do things based on what other riders do. You can't just let your team handle things.
Yeah.
You have to do the handling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that the protected sprinter position isn't really a widely applicable one, because there aren't too many people. I mean, even on a team of however many riders, you typically have one.
Oh, yeah.
That's it. So not a lot of us find ourselves in this particular position. And unless you're on a very well-organized team, you're not going to find yourself in that position anyway. You can be the designated sprinter, but unless you have a lot of really capable riders who are experienced and know how to protect you, you're still going to come to the line a bit depleted, maybe a lot depleted.
Probably one of the best strategies to make sure that you leave races unfulfilled and frustrated is to assume the role of a protected sprinter.
Yeah, seriously.
Like it's just, and it's funny because especially when you're new to racing, you kind of just assume that role.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the time because that's what we see. And because, I mean, sprint finishes predominantly, they're the ones, those mountaintop finishes, that's all that we remember from Grand Tours. And then, you know, if you don't watch the Spring Classics, then you don't see a lot of races where riders are truly having to vie on, you know, on their own and really make their own moves, do that sort of thing. Yep. So we see a lot of that. And man, everything has to align and you have to have the perfect team around you. It's really tough.
Everything has to go right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
or you have to manage any unexpected derailments.
Yeah.
And you have to manage them really well and really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really tough. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so as far as sprints go, in all cases, whether you're protected or unprotected, and we're going to move forward assuming you're an unprotected rider and you're just sprinting within a race, at the beginning of the race, at the end of the race, it's a matter of three things. It's a matter of more things than that, but I'm going to focus on the physiology, and then we'll get to the skill and the strategy. I'm really going to dive on the physiology as close as we'll get to a deep dive this week, and then we can talk skill and strategy afterwards.
Sweet.
So with the physiology, it comes down to, or one aspect of it is energy delivery. So what fuels these particular efforts? And we talk a ton about aerobic fitness and the size of our aerobic engine and VO2 max. So that's all on the aerobic or the oxidative side. And then we also touch a lot on anaerobic power or glycolytic power, especially with mass start racing, but even with steady state racing, that's a very important component. What we don't talk about, unless we're talking about mass start racing or sprint training, is the third energy system, which is highly important. It's always activated. It's always part of this process, and it's the ATP PCR. Energy system. And ATP, we know that's basically the fuel for our muscles. And in this case, this is the ATP that's actually in the muscle fiber. It's on board. We don't have to convert it. We don't have to go through any steps of glycolysis or oxidative phosphorylation, none of that. It's right there, ready to go. It lasts only a couple seconds. When it depletes, phosphocreatine donates one of its phosphates or its phosphate and recreates that ATP. And we can cycle through it and keep on putting out high amounts of energy for a very short duration. So we're talking like 10 to 15 seconds.
Right.
So that's your sprint power. And what people, I think, fail to recognize is that if you don't develop it, first off, it's not there, not to the extent that it can be. And secondly, that it replenishes really quickly. You don't just have one of those and then your race is over.
I used
Give
my
it time,
sprint is like
it comes
what people
back,
say.
it comes back, it comes back, it comes back. And I'll talk about how it comes back and how you can make it come back.
Cool. Nice.
So with this ATP PCR system, this is an anaerobic system. No oxygen is required. Theoretically, you could hold your breath and probably still sprint at the same power. You couldn't because there is still some aerobic and anaerobic contribution or aerobic contribution. But to fuel this energy system alone, no oxygen is required. Like I said, it's locally stored. It's in the muscle. Depletes really rapidly. We're talking on the time range of 6 to 15 seconds, and it activates very, very quickly, thousandths of a second, and it's rolling. It's pretty sweet. Opposed to anaerobic and aerobic, which take much longer, and then much longer in the case of aerobic.
This is like jet fuel on board.
It totally is.
Yep.
It's ready to explode. And then you can, about as close as you can get to complete exhaustion, completely deplete these stores. I've seen studies, they typically talk about running them down to 15 to 16%, others all the way down to 4%.
Wow.
The body's really picky about what it will let you deplete, and in most cases, it doesn't let you deplete it. When we talk about glycogen depletion, for instance, it maybe gets down to like 30% depletion before we start to hit the wall.
Yeah.
And you can train that. You can train it down to 25, 20%. I'm sure some athletes have gone lower, but it's a miserable process, and you got to question the productivity of that type of training.
Yeah.
Is it the best way to go about making yourself a better athlete?
Yep. Yeah.
So really sprints are all about burning off these PCR stores or emptying the tank. But the beauty of it is that tank replenishes and almost indefinitely. It just keeps coming back, keeps coming back, keeps coming back. And there are factors that lead to fatigue that will eventually, soften your sprint and eventually take it away. But ride sensibly, and you can repeat this meaningfully a number of times.
Right. Yeah.
So with this idea of your PCR stores, these phosphocreatine stores, sometimes called CP or creatine phosphate, but let's just call them PCR. It's kind of a matter of two things. You either want to increase the size of your PCR pool, and you can do that, and there's evidence to support it, but there aren't big changes. I'm not sure that should really be anyone's end game unless they're under the tutelage of a really good, knowledgeable coach, and they're training for something very particularly related to sprints.
Got it.
In most cases, you want to improve your ability to replenish that PCR pool.
Right.
And replenish it to its fullest extent in a lot of cases while still doing some work and replenish it as quickly as possible. And when it comes to replenishing these stores, there was a study in 1976 by Harris, so way back, and he noticed that this is a biphasic process. So there's a fast component and a slow component. And the fast component replenishes about 50% of your stores in as quickly as about 20 seconds.
Wow.
This assumes full rest. So you're going to have to actually lay off the gas and coast, or, if you're in a workout, actually rest.
Right. And
then the remaining 50% or so takes about 3, 4, 5 minutes. Again, assuming full rest, probably closer to 3. The fast component isn't pH related. It doesn't matter what your blood acidity is, how hard you've gassed. That 50% is going to come back rapidly with rest anyway.
Right.
But the other 50% does matter. So if your blood is still really acidic, meaning you're doing a whole lot of anaerobic work, your aerobic engine's not quite up to snuff, or it's not quite doing its job, it hasn't brought you back down to a low acidity state, that's not going to replenish. So this says we need to be really well aerobically conditioned if we want to continue to repeat high percentages of our sprint power for longer durations.
So this is the science behind why it's so important what goes on in between the hard efforts.
Absolutely.
This is why even though, because a lot of people, you think like anaerobic efforts. So like all that matters, once again, our brain thinks in systems of light switches a lot of the time instead of faders. But we think that because I can't do anaerobic efforts repeated or as hard as I want, something like that, it must just be an anaerobic limiter. But in this case, the aerobic system is key, and an efficient aerobic system is key to being able to allow your body to replenish
quickly, so that you can go again, and not just go again, but go really hard and go reasonably long, up to maybe close to that 15 seconds again, assuming full replenishment. And yeah, that replenishment, it's like after the first 3 minutes or so, you've got like 95% replenishment. Again, full rest. After about 5 minutes, you're up to like 99. And then it takes, to get to the full 100%, you need like 10 minutes of rest. It takes quite a long time to get that last little bit. But we don't need that last little bit in race scenarios. We just need to be able to hit it reasonably hard again and again and again. So if we can get a couple of minutes of coasting or sitting in, we can probably, or riding a downhill on a mountain bike race, or even on a cross course, before you can do it again. And just to further the point that aerobic conditioning is super important to how quickly your PCR stores replenish, there was a study that compared sprint athletes to untrained athletes to endurance athletes. And even against the sprint athletes, endurance-trained athletes replenish these PCR stores twice as quickly.
Yeah, that's fascinating, right?
So aerobic conditioning is a huge part of how quickly you can go again.
Super
go hard
cool.
again.
Yeah.
And interestingly, it's not really tied to VO2 max. So someone with a 55 VO2 max against someone with an 85 VO2 max can replenish PCR stores relatively as quickly, or pretty much as quickly, assuming they have good blood distribution and oxygen uptake. So lots of mitochondria, lots of capillaries, lots of oxidative enzymes, and high enzymatic activity.
Yeah.
And those things come regardless. You can improve those things regardless of changes in VO2 max.
Super cool.
Okay.
Fascinating.
So that's kind of the physiology on the energy delivery. As far as other components of the sprint, we talk a lot about neuromuscular strength. So really the communication between your brain and your muscles, and how much muscle mass you can innervate, how quickly you can activate it, that sort of thing. So that is a crucial aspect to sprinting.
Yeah.
But I think it's what too many athletes defer to, rather than consider the fact that maybe they're just not fit enough.
Yeah.
Maybe they're spending so much of their PCR and anaerobic stores that by the time they get to their sprint, they can't sprint because they didn't have good enough fitness to carry them to the meaningful moments in a more rested state.
Right.
Basically, they're just not fit enough to hang.
Yeah.
And then they say, well, I need to work on my sprint. My sprint's not strong enough. Well, actually, you probably just need to bring up your general conditioning so that when you do apply your sprint, it still has a bit of kick to it.
Yeah. Makes sense, right?
So if it is the case, however, that neuromuscular strength is what's limiting you, you know you're very fit, but you just still don't have that snap, you still can't sprint very well, this is when you have to start to engage in some neuromuscular training, where you're really training the muscle actions and not just the conditioning.
Got it.
So it's really the muscular system plus the nervous system, not just the peripheral adaptation in the muscles.
Right. Yeah.
And this is where we talk about when you hit the gym and you do heavy weights and you see strength increases without increases in the cross-sectional area of your fibers. You don't get bulkier, you just get stronger, because more of the muscle fiber that's already there is now on board. The brain's communicating with it. Yes.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So along the lines of neuromuscular improvements, it comes down to a few different components. I look at explosiveness, the ability to sustain your sprint and repeat your sprint. And that has a lot to do with basically those PCR scores we just talked about, and then movement economy.
Yeah.
So kind of covered the ability to sustain and repeat pretty well with PCR. So let's just talk about explosiveness. It's a matter of, first off, max strength. You have to have a lot of available muscle fiber to contribute to the muscle action. You have to be able to really drive those pedals, and that's a total recruitment issue. You address that with in the gym strength, heavy weights, mind you. So 3 to 5 reps, as much as you can barely move 3 to 5 times. Repeat 3, 4, 5 sets. Strength sprints, which is where you put it in a big gear and then try to wind up maybe 30 RPM to 90 RPM in a 10, 12-second span. And stomps are pretty much the same thing.
The initial part of that sprint.
Basically the same thing. So we're really close to the same thing. And for example, TrainerRoad workouts, take a look at Clark. Those incorporate bursts, little short 12 seconds within, I think, like a sweet spot workout or maybe a threshold workout.
You can see it now if you're watching on
bringing
YouTube.
that up.
You can see it there.
And then the Priest, those are a little more in line with what we're going to get to, which is the hard starts, where you gas it for 30 seconds and then you settle in. But those are prescribed as power starts. I want big gear starts on those. And the workout text and the workout description says, dump this into your biggest gear, wind it up, then sit down at an 80, 90 RPM once you've gotten it there and shift into the gear you like. But this does apply those to a workout format, those power starts.
Exactly.
Or big gear starts, I think is what I call them in the workout. Okay, so that's total recruitment. That's how much muscle mass you can actually get to fire. And then it's the rate of recruitment. So you need to be able to bring these muscle fibers online as quickly as possible. And this is the other half of recruitment. I mean, you can have crazy strength. You can be able to deadlift or squat tons of weight. You can be able to churn out 400 watts at 40 RPM. But if you can't get it going really quickly, you're never going to be much of a sprinter. Well, you're going to be a very particular type of a sprinter, kind of a Cipollini sort of. But even he had some level of explosiveness. And in order to improve this recruitment, this rate of recruitment, we do things like bursts, micro bursts, and even explosive weights. So if you're in the weight room, you got to move weight quickly. So you're going to be working at a reasonably low percentage of your 1 rep max. So like 50, 60%, sometimes lower, depending on how quickly you need to move it and how specific you want to make this. Those bursts, they don't have to be long. We're talking like 5 or 6 seconds, maybe 8 seconds on the high side of things. And then microbursts, we're all familiar with, workouts like Spanish needle, where it's 15 seconds at 150 and you dip down to full recovery. Well, it's 15 seconds recovery, so it's not full recovery, but it's a very low recovery trough. And repeat it over and over again. And that causes you to bring a ton of muscle mass online quickly, turn it off, bring it back on, turn it back off. And you do this many, many times a workout. So if you want to work on rate of recruitment, there aren't too many better ways than microburst workouts. Okay, and then when we get to skill limitations, this is why, with respect to sprinting especially, this is why a lot of these drills figure their way into workouts. I mean, I put drills in there just to make the workouts a little more interesting, but I also put them in there because I know people, whether or not they recognize they need a sprint or they don't even consider themselves sprinters, they can benefit from all of this stuff. It doesn't matter whether or not they need to be able to sprint. These are all very useful skills.
For sure.
So the first, it comes down to, let's see. So when I talk about skill limitations, I'm talking primarily about leg speed and control. So to develop leg speed, have a ton of ways. Like you'll see the cadence ladders, which is basically incremental speed so that you can kind of work it up and get a sense of where you start to lose control. So, I can go from 120 to 130, but when I try to make a jump to 135, that's when things start to fall apart. So you either recognize I need to be able to go 135 and you work on that, or you recognize I'm probably never going to need to spin quicker than 130. So I'm actually good and I'm just going to maybe start at 110 instead of starting so high, whatever.
Exactly.
Spin ups are where we trade power for speed. So as the power goes down, the leg speed comes up. So the workout stays roughly as difficult in terms of perceived exertion, but it allows you to focus less on power, more on turning your legs quickly. And then just regular speed endurance intervals. And I use these to kind of counter that antagonistic interference. So pushing down on the quads means your hamstrings have to shut off. Pulling up with your hamstrings, if you do that, means your quads have to shut off. Training speed endurance, trying to hold a high, maybe 110, 120 RPM for a couple minutes at a time. Doesn't sound like much till you try to do it. And if you're unfamiliar with it, it's really taxing. But then you learn to ride a little more in a little more relaxed manner. You shut off those muscles that would counter the driving muscles, and you get really good at that. It's not a conscious thing either. It just takes place through practice and through longer and longer speed endurance intervals.
This is why we always recommend that people get familiar with like a wide range of cadence. It's not just stuck into a narrow band.
Yeah. I mean, you need those at your disposal, especially if you're a mass start racer.
Sure.
And then form sprints, which is sprinting, but it's all about speed, not about power. You you keep the watts as low as 60%, 70% of threshold, and you just spin as fast as you can, practicing on drumming up speed quickly, controlling speed, shifting through your gears, etc.
Yes, keeping a stable pelvis on the saddle while that's happening.
All those things.
Yep.
And then I came across a sprint article written by Matt Chatleong, who's a top-notch sprinter in the U.S. here on the Western Seaboard.
Yep.
And he pins it at the RPM apex at 120 to 130. And he's a man who knows his sprints. He's a very adept and capable and accomplished sprinter.
You can see him on NorCal Cycling's videos. Yeah. Matt Chat, as he's often called. And he's darn good at what he does.
Yep. And he sees it as a 120 to 130 RPM range. He's like, you don't really need to practice. I mean, there's no harm in and some benefit to practicing above 130 RPM to hone all the skills we were just talking about and the coordination and all. But you're probably not going to apply that in a sprint.
Yeah.
If you find yourself sprinting higher than 130 RPM, it's probably not optimal.
Yeah. Need to shift.
Probably. Very probably. Unless you're just relying on speed and you've made it work in the past.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then finally, control drills. And this is really just this is AKA.
Coordination.
This is really just coordination.
Yep.
And this is practice. This is, and this is another thing I got from, I think, that very same article by Matt, is that you have to make sprinting second nature. This isn't something you can consciously think about. It just needs to be ready in an instant, unconsciously.
And I've felt that and this is why we recommend that if you are going to be utilizing a sprint in your racing, that you do this regularly in your training. I mean, because if I go without it for a month and then I go out and I just expect to be able to sprint really well in a race, it doesn't happen.
No, you have to, not only do you have to practice it frequently, but you have to practice it with the form that you want to emulate or replicate on the race course. You have to do it just as you're going to do it in the race. So that top-notch form comes through without thinking about it. You just recognize you want to close a gap on a wheel, you make it happen, you do it with the best form possible because you've practiced it so many times.
Yep, exactly.
And practice comes in the form of both types of sprints, seated and out of the saddle. So you're gonna apply both. Whether the types of racing we're talking about, you're going to apply both. So get good at both. Yeah.
There are times where a seated sprint absolutely makes sense, and we'll actually kind of get into that in a little bit here on some practical application for it. Not just out of the saddle.
So just to kind of put all that together, my recommended progression, and you'll see this if you follow a base build specialty cycle. If you start with base and move through it, this kind of takes shape depending on your discipline, more specifically or less. But it all happens with bursts to start, just little bits of innervation, just 6 to 8 seconds sort of bursting, sprinkled into an already muscle endurance oriented workout, like a sweet spot workout. And then sprints to follow. And typically I'd start with speed sprints. We're just working on form. Then we work on stomps, which are really strength sprints. And then you put the two together and you make them power sprints.
I even follow this progression actually many times just during a normal sprint training workout.
Oh, yeah,
in the sense that I'll start out and I'll actually start out with lower cadence efforts, high cadence efforts where basically leg speed is what I'm after.
That's where the neuromuscular communication kind of ramps up.
Yep. And then I'll work into things where I actually start to add in a little bit, I'll basically just make my cadence go a little bit lower. So I'm going from 130, then I'll just drop down.
That strength element is kind of what incorporates something called post-activation potentiation, where you're actually priming the muscles to do heavy load work. Then you put it together.
Yep. And then at that point, after that, I work on sprints that are basically at varying distances, right? And I'll work on doing it at short sprints to start, and then I'll work on making them slightly longer and slightly longer.
And this is probably why in races you can effectively utilize your sprint.
Yep.
Because you practice it. And you practice all elements of it.
Yeah, and when you go through that whole, I think that one thing that a lot of people skip are the sprints where you're not going crazy fast in terms of overall speed, but you're at a really high cadence. And those things add so much. They kind of they raise the stakes on the coordination that you need to have, because it's so much more difficult to maintain coordination when you don't have all of that resistance to press against.
Very much so. I try try climbing out of the saddle at 50% of your threshold.
Yeah.
See how good a climber you are when you don't have the support of the resistance in the drivetrain.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of like points out a lot of things. We're like, oh man, I need to refine X, Y, and Z. I refine those. And then that makes the rest of the sprints much more powerful in terms of numbers, and then much faster in terms of speed.
Yeah, speed is one element, one very important element of sprinting. Leg speed in particular. That's what I'm talking about.
Helps a ton.
So, and then we do have, so just super quickly, burst workouts, look at Ebbitt's for sprint workouts, and not to be confused with sprint intensity training. Sprint intensity training workouts like chairing, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about workouts like Berryessa, where you do a reasonably short sprint, rest quite a long time, and the idea being to optimize power, not to optimize or increase fatigue, which is what the sprint intensity training is pretty much about.
Yep.
And then hard start intervals, look at Crane or Zalabu or Richardson or Broken Finger.
Yep.
And then I have a lot of shorter practice hard start intervals, like Backbone and Crane.
Crane's actually an opener that I use.
It's a great workout.
Yep.
You do a really hard workout, and then you settle in just long enough to know, okay, based on how hard I just sprinted, I think this is an effort level I could probably sustain for a few minutes.
Yep.
So it can help you fine tune, and it can help you open too.
Yeah, it's for me, I feel like, because in the openers, when I do this as an opener workout, I'm doing that very thing. I'm trying to fine tune things.
Yeah, sure.
You know? Yeah,
and
super helpful.
Those intervals in particular can help you see, if I sprint at 200%, not like you're going to be watching your power meter on a race course, but in training you can get a feel for what 200% feels like, or 300%, or whatever you're going to try to do. If I go that hard, can I follow it with a 90% effort? Because that's what I'm going to have to hang on to.
Yeah.
Or does it just crush me?
Yep.
Or can I ride at 95% and maybe I can sprint a little harder? Or do I want to employ the 95% because that can probably start to shed people?
Tying this all full circle to what you just talked about, scientifically, we now know that anybody can sprint for a short period of time because of the PCR system and everything else that we have on board. The
energy is there.
But when we talk about what you can do thereafter, that's where everything else comes into play.
And that's when hard starts come into it. So it's not just doling out the sprint, but it's following that sprint immediately with a pretty high level effort, which is what racing is. I mean, the cyclocross starts we're talking about right here, the mountain bike starts, where everyone goes full gas for like 30, 40 seconds.
Yep.
And the people who aren't as committed or aren't as familiar or maybe don't have the sprint capability, basically they're already however many riders behind. And these are all riders that, as Corey pointed out, he'll catch over the course of a race. But what if you didn't have to catch those guys? What if you got to catch the next 5 guys up the road because you sprinted a little better and you hung with them?
Yep. Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And this is why you'll see all throughout our specialty plans for these sort of races that require these sort of efforts, you'll see these workouts mixed in all throughout them because they're preparing you for that. And then this is why you'll also hear hard start intervals, interval sessions also sometimes referenced as race winner intervals. I've heard that as well. Yeah. Because they're the sort of things where you can really get the gap and then you can sustain the gap.
Really the only difference with race winners is to stack a bunch of them together. Yep. So you prepare both your body and your mind for the fact that typically you have to do it a number of times. So you got to be able to do it strongly a number of times.
Right. So getting back to the practical tips on top of all of this.
Yeah, and this is kind of where you take over.
Yeah, on the positioning side of things. So call-ups, obviously, with cyclocross and mountain biking are extremely important. You could also say the same for some criteriums as well. If you get a bad call-up position, you've got a criterium that has very short distance between turns, and it has a lot of turns.
It's so hard to move up.
Or like a decisive climb, something like that, with like a technical turn thereafter, because that will always cause things to accordion a whole bunch, something like that. Then its call-up position matters a lot. And we've talked about call-up position before, but really it's all about earning the points that you need to earn beforehand. We've also referenced this before, but in cyclocross racing, you have to race USAC races, and then you basically have to just get points of those races. And they have a whole ranking system for points that USAC uses, and you can go online, you can see where that's at, and then you can use that to rank yourself. On mountain biking, there are some weird workarounds, and it could technically happen in cross too. I just don't know if it does. But on mountain biking, there are a lot of fields that are scored like road fields, where they have P1, 2. And in some cases, you'll race like in the Midwest. This is more common. In spots back east, this is common where they have Pro 1 fields. And then as a result, everyone's scored together. And if I get last place, but somebody really fast like Keegan Swenson races, like the best pro,
raises the tide.
I get a ton of call-up points, right? My rating goes up, or my ranking goes up. Whereas if I won my state championship and it was a really hard battle against a bunch of evenly matched riders, I would get less points. So it's a bit of a flawed system, and it certainly behooves you to look into it and try to figure out how to get the best call-up points.
And try to recruit a high-level professional rider to come to your
Yeah, that could help too. So that aside, one of the big things that you have to remember, whatever your call-up position is you don't necessarily have to out-sprint everybody by going as hard as you can. You simply just have to have your handlebars or elbow in front of the next person. That's it. Because then at that point you control, right? So it's really just about relative positioning instead of just thinking I have to sprint as hard as I can. Yeah. Kind of sit outside of the moment. Because if you're not on the front row, chances are you're not going to be able to sprint as hard as you can because you'll be stuck behind something going on. Yeah. So in that situation, don't just give it absolutely everything. You may be fine with going 90%, and that 90% may allow you to retain a lot of those PCR stores instead of exhausting them and be able to use them, may not cause so much of a hit on the system, so to speak. So it's something that would be, it's important to kind of get outside of the moment and just think about that. Also, don't just go crazy hard if you don't have to. If the course, for example, doesn't get decisive or narrows down or doesn't have a bottleneck moment for a long time or doesn't have one at all, then going as hard as you possibly can isn't obviously a good idea. You can probably pace things a little bit more evenly at the start if there isn't a bottleneck issue, and then you'll be fine. Also, I've seen some really savvy and confident riders that have bad call-up positions intentionally hang back because they know a bottleneck will happen. If they trust that they are really that much better than the rest of the field, that they'll be able to catch up to that bottleneck without as much energy used, and then they'll still be able to bridge to the front of the field. So, but it's, man, you really got to be kind of a class above the rest of your competitors to be able to make that work.
Yeah, and you have to know it.
Yeah. And then the other thing is don't pick the wrong people to go behind. And this can be super hard when you're not racing with people you know. So locally, it's super easy. Like I know which people are really good off of a start, right? If you see a new rider, or if you see a rider like if you see somebody that seems to be having trouble clipping into the pedals before they get in, probably not the best person to be behind. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Just position yourself behind a more skilled rider or a more seasoned rider is usually a good approach to do, for sure. Also, don't necessarily try to offset yourself. Many times that just ends in you
That's a good point.
Trying to surge ahead, and then you can't fit through the gap, and then you have to bobble, and it just causes a lot of issues.
Especially if you know you have the wheel of a strong starter.
Yeah, absolutely. And then a couple things to think about. So the surface that you're starting on, this is super important. A lot of the time races will have you start out on a variable surface. And what I mean by that is that it's not going to be paved. It won't be really tacky dirt, something like that. It'll be like gravel. It'll be like DG, something that'll be kind of loose.
Pretty common.
And I don't know, some people say it's because it makes it a bit safer so then people don't go quite as fast right off the gun. But I'd argue that it might be a little bit more dangerous just because of people losing traction and then everything else that comes with it. Regardless, it is the way it is. And one of the things that you need to think about, like we were talking about out of the saddle versus seated sprints, when you start, when we had cyclocross nationals here in Reno, for example, you started on a very hard packed surface with, and it was like decomposed granite on top. So very small pebbles on top of a very hard surface.
Loose over hard, yeah.
Yeah, and it basically, if you got out of the saddle and just tried to sprint as hard as you could, you would slide. Your back tire would lose traction. When you lose traction, that causes you to be able to clip in, and then instantly you've got 2 seconds that you've wasted in terms of your time, but then everybody else has gotten way ahead of you. Start ruined. So in that case, when you're not on the front line in that scenario, it's actually, and even if you are on the front line, it's not a bad idea to stay seated and work on your ability to be able to recruit power seated from the stop. And then get to the point where once you get up to speed, then you can get out of the saddle and apply a bit more. But all that torque going into the tire when you're on a variable surface and you're not moving, it just wants to break loose a little bit too easily. So that's a key thing. Make sure that you look at the start surface and you know what you're going to do in terms of seated or standing, how you're going to output all that torque. It makes you can see riders that have a really bad call-up position, but when they play their cards right in this regard, they're able to work their way past a whole lot of riders.
Good advice, yeah.
So helps a ton. And then the other thing that you have to do is you just have to practice these hard starts, because even on variable conditions, sometimes it's very possible to still do an out of the saddle, very effective sprint and maintain traction, but that takes a lot of practice. It takes this, it's this weird counterbalance of this storm of power and force and aggression, but then also this kind of like the peace and the calm and the in tune nature that you have to be able to.
Water.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Like you're just treading on thin ice, basically trying to maintain that traction. So that's
and then also
something I would pay attention to.
Some good points, some finer points, but some very important ones are, you mentioned here, clip-in speed, line position, and gear choice.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And on the gear choice thing, I don't know what gear I started on my cassette, and I probably should, but I know how it feels, and I know that it feels right.
I've never chosen a gear by knowing I'm in my 17.
Yeah.
Rather, I just look on the cog set and I can kind of associate. I know that's going to give me enough resistance to work against, and it's not going to bog me down. Yep.
One of the ways that you can do this to kind of help yourself figure out the gear is, and once again, this takes a bit of fine tuning, but practice your starts first of all, and practice which gear you work best in, because everybody may work better starting from a slightly different gear, right? You may do better if you start with a faster cadence. You may do better if you start with a slower cadence. In most cases, when you're talking about starting on a variable surface, you want to start with a slower cadence, but you will not want to put out as much force, and you'll just have to be okay with, the initial snap being not quite as quick, and it'll pay off right after. So you have to get familiar with it. But when you do that, when you shift into whatever gear you want to be in and you're on the start, get just into the position. I'm motioning here on video, so if you're just listening to this, try to think of this, envision this in your mind. Have your foot in the position where you'd want it to start in a sprint. So usually that's somewhere around like 1 o'clock, somewhere like that.
It's a crank position.
Crank position. And then just allow your bike to roll forward to your arm's extent and back, and then feel how much your foot moves. And you kind of get in tune with that's the right gear. And that's one way, unless you want to count your cogs, that's another way that you could do as well. But that's a good way to kind of feel. And I know what the right feel is based on that in terms of how I want to start. Makes a massive difference. So, and then on clip-in speed, this is why a lot of people make pedal decisions entirely based off of this, because they can get in and out easier. And something with this, if you have worn out pedals or cleats, you can do a ton to be able to clip in easier. Go through and apply some like the chain lube that you use on your chain. You might be able to just, first of all, make sure your cleats are very clean. Make sure your pedals are very clean. Sometimes it helps even to go in with a little bit of like sandpaper, some fine grit sandpaper, and rub them if they have any sort of like
debris
staining or rust or anything like that. So you can get them clean that way. And then also, I usually take a little bit of the same chain lube that I use, the Squirt chain lube, and I'll put that onto my cleat, and I'll put that onto my pedal, the surfaces where I make contact, and then I'll just make sure to wipe up the excess. That usually smooths things out a bit.
Be choosy with that lubricant, though, because I put, I think, Bow Shield, or I don't want to, it's perfectly good lube, but on my pedals, made them feel like I was dancing on ice.
Oh, yeah.
So
it can get really
pretty
sketchy.
Unnerving. Yeah.
Yep. And you have to play with the tension as well. And this is why a lot of people will actually have easier tension on the side that their foot, like, so let's say that you start with your right foot forward, and they'll have their left foot is the one that has to clip in once they start, and they'll have lower tension on that one, so then they can clip in easier. So that's usually a common setup. And you can even see, I think Crank Brothers has cleats where they have, like, you can kind of flip the orientation or something, I think, and then you can get ones that are basically easier to clip into and then not as easy to clip into. Yeah, so kind of different approaches you can take to doing that. But yeah, and then once again, we talked about sprinting to kind of start this whole thing off. When we talk about maintaining tension so you can maintain torque, the same exact thing. Just remember, you're sprinting off the line too, and the same thing applies. If you don't have tension all the way through, and kind of this like tension where you're almost like pressing backward on the handlebars and using your sit bones on the saddle as like a really like strong anchor point, it's really tough to be able to drive your weight down into those wheels if you don't have that all set up. So yeah, that's where that is.
Good stuff.
Reviews. First of all, just want to mention something. Thank you so much for all the podcast reviews. They're awesome. There's another spot too where you can review TrainerRoad, actually just the whole entire, the whole training system in general. That's TrainerRoad.com/review. So if you're listening to this and you like TrainerRoad, please go over there and leave us a 5-star review, and then just let us know if we need to do something to earn that 5-star review. We'd be happy to do it. So let's go into Steven's question. Cool. He says, what is the threshold for morning fasted training? It's a question a bunch of us have. He says, what I mean by this is I do my first training fasted every morning. However, I take pre-workout and prebiotics. The pre-workout is marked at 80 calories and the prebiotics are marked at 20 calories and 2 gummies. I also take a multivitamin and 1 aspirin. He just mentions for health. And he says, but those don't have calories. He says, thanks. Love the podcast. Makes my commute much more enjoyable. So we all have
Stephen,
this one.
Sorry to say, don't really know. And I'm not the only one who doesn't really know. I was listening to, it was either a Peter Attia or a Joe Rogan, but I'm pretty sure it was Dom D'Agostino. And he is one of the foremost authorities on everything keto. And he's a very knowledgeable man. If it wasn't him, it was maybe on a Sigma Nutrition podcast, but it was a resource I trust. And I listened to a lot of podcasts over the course of, I haven't been here for a couple weeks, so I can't remember which one it was. I tried to find it. I couldn't. But again, a resource I trust. They talked about, does black coffee interrupt the fast? Does a little bit of half and half in your black coffee, BCAAs, collagen, excuse me, sodium, artificial sweeteners. And while we can say definitively, well, these things do impact insulin, what impact does insulin have on the fast? And impact in particular, are we talking about, is it a disruption of the autophagy that we're looking for, the cell cleanup process that takes place? Does it disrupt the AMPK signaling, the AMPK signaling that we're trying to achieve with fasted rides? Sadly, the whether or not these disruptions occur and the extent of the disruptions hasn't been studied. Or if it has been studied, it's in the works right now or it's emerging science, but it's not out there.
Cool.
And it might be the sort of thing that's never going to get enough funding to be out there.
It's tough, right?
Yeah. So we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
It'd be great if we did. And that's something that we like. I think everybody has thought when they do fasted training. They're like, I wonder, you know.
And if anybody knows of a study that is out there that's escaped my attention, please point it out to us. Because I'm far from alone on thinking that the research just isn't there.
Yeah. You can go to forum.trainerroad.com, and this is episode 236, and you can find it there. Be able to do it there. Let's go into Matt's question. Says, love the podcast and your product. 5 stars were given a long time ago. Do you know if Apple lets you vote again at some point, or is it a once in a lifetime thing? I think it's just once in a lifetime. But like I said, you could also go over to trainerroad.com/reviews. You can review it on the Google Play Store, plenty of other spots, or just share the podcast. Honestly, that's hugely helpful. So it says, my question is regards to cooldowns. I'm at a point in life where low volume is probably as much time as I am allowed to be on the bike, with an occasional plus version of the suggested workout, which sometimes the plus version is an increase in intensity, but sometimes it's an increase in terms of time as well.
It's not a consistent thing. It is safe to say it makes it harder.
Yeah. He says, I usually work out in the morning and have a pretty tight schedule in order to change and get to work on time. Sometimes I'm in between 2 workout variations and found that I can do a plus version if I finish without the cool down. My legs usually feel fine after, and it does not affect my subsequent workouts. But is this okay? Am I losing something by skipping the cool down? Thanks again for a great product, and happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, so Matt, this is kind of another one of those situations that I just described with information on fasting. Is there aren't really studies to support cooling down. There aren't really studies to refute cooling down. There are simply known occurrences.
Sure.
If we know these things happen and they're beneficial, then there's probably some benefit to cooling down. Whether or not it's a necessity is pretty contentious, actually.
Right. Yep.
So if we just understand that the objective of cooling down is we're trying to return to a parasympathetic state. We've wound ourselves up, and that's the rest and digest. We've wound ourselves up, put ourselves in a very sympathetic state due simply to exercise, and we need to reverse that whole process. In doing so, one of the things that we're after is we want to facilitate our endocrine recovery. And in particular, we want to reduce catecholamines. So epinephrine and norepinephrine are both part of that sympathetic or fight or flight system, or that response. And in the brain, norepinephrine increases our arousal state, makes us more alert. It also leads to restlessness and anxiety. Those are all things that are going to help us evade danger.
Sure.
Or in the case of a race, liberate energy and work hard. In the body, epinephrine, and there's some overlap between the two, it raises our blood sugar levels, obviously necessary if we're going to do hard work, increases our heart rate, increases the blood flow to the working muscles, decreases blood flow to our GI tract. These are all things, again, we want to reverse. We want to bring that back around so that we can wind down, move on with our day, or go to sleep, whatever.
Right.
And then also along the endocrine lines is glucocorticoids, in particular cortisol, which is, again, part of this sympathetic nervous system. And really anything veering parasympathetic is going to help you bring cortisol down. So anything relaxing. I mean, it could be anything from deep breathing to eating some carbohydrates to a number of things, but trying to reverse the sympathetic state.
Yeah. Yep.
So another, I guess, vote in favor of cooling down is it reduces the effects of the post-exercise hypotension that I've talked about a number of times. So you're working hard, you stop working, you feel dizzy, or in some cases actually faint.
Yeah.
So the scenario being you're working, heavy sustained effort, lots of blood in your legs, heart rate's elevated, and we as endurance athletes typically have bigger, stronger heart ventricles in particular, so chambers. They push more blood. We have blood vessels with healthier endothelial tissue, so they're more pliable. They open more, and we're pushing a lot of blood into them. So there's a whole lot of exercise or a whole lot of blood being pushed to the exercising muscles, in particular our legs. And if we go from a heavy workload to just stopping to workout cessation, the blood can pool. Because you think about it, your heart slowed down, your blood pressure's on the decline, muscle action ceases. What is assisting that venous return? What's pushing it back up to your brain so that you don't get lightheaded, so that you don't faint? But this does demonstrate that this is very much intensity dependent.
Yeah.
So if you're doing an endurance ride at 60%, you're probably not going to be as dependent on a cool down to avoid something like this post-exercise hypotension, this low blood pressure that follols hard work.
Yeah, if you're doing like gold sprints.
Hard stuff though, exactly. And you're right off the bike and grab a beer.
Yeah, exactly. In a bar.
Expect to be challenged in terms of your balance.
Yeah.
And then we do know that the light activity the light activity that follows does facilitate blood flow. And the argument is that extra blood flow enhances recovery because we're, pushing nutrients in, pulling byproducts out either through the lymph or the blood itself. But again, no strong data to support this, but empirically it makes sense.
Yeah.
There's also no research to support the idea that it reduces soreness or DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. Yeah. So if that's what you're looking for, this probably isn't the way to achieve it.
Yeah.
I mentioned lymph. It's similar to the rationale behind recovery rides even, where we're trying to get on there and we're trying to move gently. We're not trying to inflict any stress on the muscle. Rather, we're trying to facilitate blood in, lymph out.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
And then minor but real benefits to cooling down. You can accumulate extra ride time. It feels good. I mean, it just feels good. You kind of bask in the glow of the after effects of a hard workout. And there are no known negative effects. So if you want to do a cool down, don't ever beat yourself up for doing it. It definitely facilitates cooling, especially in the case of your fan still being on, you're drinking cold fluids or maybe some ice or slushy or something, depending on your scenario. Yep. It helps you equalize with the ambient temperature. These are all beneficial, especially if, and I think we'll get to this question, you're going to bed afterward.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
And then the only reason I even need, I think, is it's an opportunity to disconnect from the psychological stress of the workout. Oh, yeah. Workouts are hard. They wind you up. And going into a hard workout, you carry a ton of stress into that workout. Yeah. You deal with a ton of stress over the course of that workout. You got to dissipate that stress after the workout, and no better time than a cool down. Yep. Yeah, 100%. I think all of us listening to this have recognized when we go through and do a workout that we kind of turn into a different person when it's really tough. And it's a little embarrassing sometimes.
Yeah, sure. Right. Yeah. I get accused of that all the time with like racing. Nate always says,
try teaching a class to 7 people who are like fresh out of bed.
Yeah. Right.
You're being not the nicest guy.
Right. So it's kind of it's a totally different experience. But you were talking about cooling your core body temperature down. Yeah. Nate's joining us.
There he is.
He's here. So let's actually that's perfect transition. It's as if we planned it.
Almost.
So let's get into Auntie's question. It says, thanks for the podcast and constant stream of information. You've been talking about late night training and it being less than optimal. Unfortunately, I'm in the situation. 5 kids and constantly changing work hours where I'm forced to train mostly at night. Many nights at 8 p.m. is the earliest time to start, with sweet spot-based mid-volume training rides taking mostly 60 to 90 minutes. That's his current situation. It says, I was wondering what I and others who struggle with late training could do to help recovery. I try to be at bed by 11 p.m. and keep my sleep at 8 hours or more. But do you guys know what else could be done? So this is kind of like an interesting point that was brought up here about the sleep aspect, because many times, and this is like before we even go into the question, but many times when you train late, you still have to get up very early and you can't get 8 hours of sleep. Yeah. But in this case, this is happening. So there's still 8 hours of sleep is good.
It is, but the quality of the sleep is what's in question.
Question 10, Nate, is where
Question 10.
Yeah, there we go.
Before we go into all this stuff,
yeah,
I wanted to say that, 8 p.m. is the earliest time to start training, so maybe done by 9, and then be in bed by 11.
Yeah.
I kind of follow. I'm shifted forward, but I do that like every single day.
Yeah.
I think probably the worst part, maybe we'll get into it. Like if she starts at 8, ends at 9, goes to bed at 9:30.
Yeah.
That would be impossible. But like a 2 hour afterwards,
Terrible.
I almost feel like you kind of get this. That's almost like when I start to crash from after a workout, especially if you eat, where you could get tired.
Yeah.
So it's not it might not be as bad as you think it is.
Right. It's just shifted later, so to speak.
But poor sleep quality is very bad.
Yeah, and we'll get into...
And that's kind of my argument. It's not my argument against it. It's my biggest concern.
Absolutely. So Auntie says, I was wondering what I and others who struggle with late training could do to help recovery.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the main crux of what we want to talk about here.
Yeah, because there's no argument against it. You have to train when you have to train. I mean, your schedule is what it is. You make the best of whatever your situation is.
Yep, absolutely.
First and foremost, if you have this option, if this is a possibility based on your rise time and how everything lines up, try to end your workout 2 to 3 hours pre-bedtime. That forgives a lot of sin. That a lot of the ill effects that come with working out close to bed dissipate strongly over the course of a 2 or 3 hour break.
Yes, like I said, like the stop at 9, go to bed at 11.
If you can, yeah. But I mean, if you have to be up at 5 o'clock, that changes things a bit. I mean, you're going to shortchange your sleep. It gets tricky, very tricky. And then, of course, like we just said, cool down. There are a lot of benefits to cool down. Regulating your body temperature is one of those things. For sure. And I'm going to explain specifically how that ties to sleep quality.
Cool.
So with respect to the importance of lowering your core body temperature, sleep onset, so falling asleep, can be really difficult with an elevated core temperature.
I feel this every time after I do like a hard race in the evening or I do like anything like that.
Especially in the summer where it's already hot outside. And if you don't have a house with air conditioning, I mean, it can be brutal. You just know you're not getting good sleep that night.
Flashbacks to Kona.
Yeah.
When we didn't have AC.
Or single track 6.
Single track 6. Oh,
that was so hot.
Chad, everyone, imagine Chad with like, I think he wore his fishnet base layer, but then he had like...
I did not.
Yeah.
At the room?
The room
you did.
No, I did not.
And then he had, but on top of that, so it was like camelbacks, but he like froze the bladders.
Yeah.
And they had these strings, and he put it around his neck, and it would like touch his...
I had ordered
that.
some like mesh, some really nice underwear from Mack Weldon, and it came in this plastic bag with this tiny little elastic string around it.
Yeah.
So out of desperation, I filled that with ice and I would dangle it around my neck. And I probably still have scars from it. But either way, I needed to cool down.
By the way, pro tip, Mack Weldon.
Yeah.
You like it?
Yeah, I love it.
You like it?
That's all. My socks
Me
and
too.
underwear.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 3 of us wear the same underwear, just in case y'all wanted to know.
Because everybody needed to know that detail.
No, but actually,
brand of underwear.
Yeah, we don't share. We don't share.
Like the AirNet, is that the one?
Yep,
Yeah.
it's the best
They
one.
don't give us anything, right?
It's so
AirNet
good.
X.
I wish they would.
Yeah, they should,
Not
right?
cheap, but it
They're
lasts
the
a long
only
time.
underwear I've worn in the last 2 years.
You told me about it, and now that's all I do. I had like all these Hanes ones.
Yeah.
Threw them all away. I have all the same color too, and then I just rotate them through.
To this point, it's really like if you are the sort of person that trains and then goes to bed shortly thereafter, you'll probably want to look into optimizing what sort of sheets you use, what sort of mattress you have, what sort of all those
we've
things
actually got
to
a product
cool off.
recommendation.
Yeah,
Well, maybe.
We'll get to it.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll talk about it.
It just got delivered.
Okay. Oh, no, I'm
Please,
sorry.
Chad.
Let's
go
talk about underwear more.
No, let's go to Chad.
Okay.
They make really good socks too.
Yeah, they do actually.
AirNet X socks also.
Yeah,
But so does Albert's. Albert's socks are giving them a run for their money.
Oh,
Really?
wow.
Again, it's so neither here nor there.
No, this is the important. This is what happens when I come in. Like,
I know, right?
Let's
Get all the
change it up,
details.
guys.
Let's go.
Okay, so again, sleep onset can be really difficult if your core temp's up. So the objective is going to be to get core temp down. Matthew Walker in his book Why We Sleep, if you haven't read it, just read it. It's
Super
so
good.
good on so many levels. Talks about circadian alterations in body temperature, and they happen anyway, regardless of sleep. So we're on a circadian rhythm. Our temperature ebbs and flows. Doesn't matter if we're in bed or not. It's going to happen. So we try to time it or facilitate it. The study in '97 by Murphy Campbell said, and I quote, "It's suggested that a rapid decline in core body temperature, increases the likelihood of sleep initiation and may facilitate an entry into the deeper stages of sleep." This is a crucial thing. This is information that's been out there for quite some time, and it's been backed up again and again. And all we're really looking for, and it's not a big change, we're looking for like maybe a 1 degree Celsius drop, somewhere in the ballpark of 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit. It's not a big drop, but it is a drop that tells the body it's time to slow down, time to sleep in this case. With intense exercise, however, that's a very tall order.
Yeah.
And kind of a side note, this is probably another case against pre-bedtime alcohol. Boo. Not that we need another reason to not ingest alcohol prior to bed, but it doesn't elevate core temp. It actually elevates skin temp, but high skin temp in bed.
Should I do all my drinking before noon? Is that what you're saying?
Honestly, that's the argument he makes.
Really?
And I'm starting to practice at 9 a.m. every day.
What's his name? Campbell?
I get drunk.
This is for
Walker.
Campbell.
I want to go back. You know how people do like end of year reviews? I want to go back and find every time where Chad has done research relating to alcohol and how sad he is for the whole podcast and kind of put it together in a compilation.
It'd fill a podcast.
Is there anything
like there's been no positives?
No, I think the one thing
It
maybe
aids sleep
culture
onset.
or not culture, but being with friends and being happy.
Sure, the
Wasn't there like
social
the
aspect
social
of it?
aspect
Absolutely.
of it? I thought
Yeah,
there
there's
was
something
one.
there, but in terms of health, not in terms of sleep quality.
Yeah.
Oh no,
It
I'm
does
saying
nothing good for sleep.
I think there's nothing for sleep. I'm thinking of other health things.
Except
There's some artery stuff, but then it was kind of like questions later.
Yeah, it can facilitate sleep onset, so it can help you fall asleep. But in terms of
just-
sleep maintenance,
it's just bad
that's
sleep.
garbage. In terms of deep REM sleep, or I think maybe it's the REM dreaming sleep. Either way,
Yeah,
bad
I've blacked out a few times. And
So
just
yeah, that helps sleep, doesn't it?
Yep.
you can't help it. Sleep.
Yeah.
Just kidding, everyone.
We threw you off, Chad.
So let's see. So with alcohol, this kind of ties in too. But if you increase your heart rate, you increase your vasodilation. Both things exercise do, and sadly, so does alcohol intake. You're raising your skin temperature, and we raise skin temperature basically to pull heat from the core. So higher skin temperature typically means lower core temperature. That's the whole purpose of heating up our skin. This is what exercise does, and it just shows that this is how our bodies cool. So the point is, cooling the skin is a good way to cool the core. So, and not that alcohol really figures into this at all. I'm just going to leave that alone.
it's just sad.
So, but this is why pre-sleep showers. So after you've done like the Tuesday night races that we do in the middle of the summer, where
Those are the worst.
it's probably still 80 degrees at night. The sun's gone down and it's still 80 degrees, and you come home and you're all revved up.
Yes.
Eat your food, you're on fire.
Yeah.
So a cool shower is not a bad thing to do. And if you, in lieu of a shower, you can just splash water on your face and head, on your hands and feet, all those surfaces with all those anastomoses that we talked about way back when. And it doesn't have to be cool water. It just has to be something that allows evaporation, right? Because that's what offloads the heat. It can even be very hot water, and I'm not talking about after a race, but if you take like a pre-bed shower or bath, getting out of the bath, the drop in temperature you get from the hot water into the ambient temp is usually enough to kick off that whole signaling process and melatonin release and all those things that facilitate better sleep.
And we talked about this. I take super hot showers and probably for way too long. And I have like an hour period after time where I'm just like so hot. The same covers feel really hot. Also hot tubs, people say they put them to sleep. Man, I get so...
You do the opposite.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I get like, it raises my core temperature and
Your temperature has to go down for good sleep. It's
super
just-
hot in your blankets. And that's how I can tell, right? Like if in the same temperature of room, if you're putting on blankets and you're really hot, but then later in the night you're not really hot, that's that core changing.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
And it's a subtle shift. Like I said, it's only a degree or 2 or 3, depending Celsius versus Fahrenheit.
Yeah, you guys are going to try, or you're going to try something, right, Nate?
Yes,
try it,
I
Nick.
bought a product. So this is not an endorsement. They don't give us anything. I
Yes.
paid retail. I've been looking at it for a while. Someone actually in the forum recommended it. There's like a thread about like bed. It's kind of like a sleep thread.
Yep.
People saying things they like. And someone asked me about my weighted blanket, which I do like. I really like that. It's like a 20-pound weighted blanket. Feels good.
Yeah.
This is it's called the Uller, or also the Chili Pad. And it's like a pad that you put on below your sheet and water runs through it. And there's a little unit that uses a fan to cool the water, or it heats it.
Yeah.
Yep. So you can set a temperature.
Tucker's showing it right now if
So
you're joining
temperature
us
control
live.
device.
Yep.
And when we say Uller, it's OOLER.
Like
But it's
cooler.
super expensive.
Cooler minus a C.
Yeah.
It's like $800 for half of a Cal King.
That's crazy.
But what I'm thinking is like sleep's so important.
Yeah.
And I wake up a lot, like in the middle of the night, either too cold or too hot.
Yeah.
If I'm training a lot, I'll have like night sweats.
Yeah.
And then you get cold after that.
Yeah.
If this thing lasts a couple of years and I can get better quality sleep over those couple of years, my productivity will be better, like everything in my life will be better. And to me, that's probably worth one less carbon part on my bike.
Sure.
Honestly,
Yeah.
along those lines.
If
I
it
mean,
works. So just some people talking about, I want to say a couple more things. Some people say maybe it doesn't get cold enough. So if you have like a really hot room, I mean, like in Kona, if it's like 90, it might not overpower that.
So it might not combat a hot day, but if you have your thermostat set at a regular...
We'll see, right? So, and anyways, the person in the forum really liked it. They said they they thought it wasn't working, but then when they didn't use it, they got super hot.
Huh.
And there's also a setting that's kind of cool that can warm you up in the morning.
The
Maybe that'll
theory's
help me get
awesome.
out of bed.
That's
the theory's
appealing
great.
Yeah.
To cold sleepers
Should
for
be
sure.
so hot that I can't get out of sleep or that I don't want to stay in bed.
Yeah, exactly.
Goes up to like 105 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know that in Celsius, but pretty warm.
That's a lot. Yeah.
I've actually
low 40s, so right?
I've actually programmed our thermostat that way in our house so that like when it's time to get up for all of us, we all get up at the same time.
Same here.
That it gets really warm, and then that makes it so that I don't want to get it. I don't want to be in bed.
I'll use this and I'll
swap.
talk
I do the
about
same
it
thing.
later. I feel like I should wait until the summer too. But anyways, it's like a different experience in the winter than it is in the summer, right?
Yeah, undoubtedly.
Sure.
But I'll let you know if I personally like it. But again, don't just go out and buy it because it could, I don't know what it's like.
Yeah, we have no data just
Yeah.
yet.
So one interesting part on this is like you've done your workout. We've talked about the cooling part of things, but then I guess if you just talk about like schedule after the race,
Yeah.
that's like another thing where you kind of have to like whittle it down to like what's your highest priority. Like, do you need to get food in,
Yep.
or do you need to get to sleep?
And
like, which one's more important?
That's the dilemma. And honestly, if I had to prioritize one over the other, I'd go back to sleep.
Yeah.
I'll get to why in a minute. But in terms of nutrition, there are certain opportunities that this scenario presents you with. If you're interested in the whole sleep low approach, where you want to sleep on carb depleted muscles, glycogen depleted muscles, there's an opportunity to do it. Just make sure you're not starving yourself, because basically going to bed very hungry, that's not going to facilitate sleep either. So make sure you get a little bit of protein, a little bit of fat, but eat a meal, just keep it low on the carbohydrate side. Maybe just focus on vegetables.
Yep.
Go too high carbohydrate, and that can impact your sleep, in particular your deep sleep, but oddly increases your REM or dreaming sleep. So it's kind of a trade-off there. Maybe not the soundest argument against it. And then high carbohydrate intake before bed can also increase the number of awakenings. As can alcohol. I can attribute, or I can attest to that.
Another sad panda.
Painting myself as an
alcohol
alcoholic here. I really don't drink as much as it sounds like I do.
moment. It's a brand now, Chad.
Okay,
You just
so-
have to uphold the brand,
Well, what does it sound like?
I like my drink. I don't drink a ton, though. Okay, so my stance, basically due to the fact that there's not large enough or long enough studies and the human subjectivity that figures out into anything nutritional,
Yeah.
don't overthink it. Eat a decent meal, see how you sleep. It's as far as the nutrition advice, I think it's very much a trial and error process. There's no hard rules to say this is what's going to work best for everybody and this is not going to work for anybody. The consensus advice in terms of the bit of research that there is go to bed neither too full nor too hungry. Don't go excessively high on the carbohydrate, and try to avoid sugar altogether.
So plate of brownies is bad.
Probably.
Yeah. Not
And
ideal.
caffeine.
Oh yeah, and then caffeine is unanimously a terrible thing before bed. I
Sure.
don't think
Like
anybody
many
needs to be
hours.
told that, but yes, it has a long half-life.
You probably want to stop by 1 o'clock
think
in
it's
the
a 9-hour
afternoon.
half-life,
Yeah,
right?
it's like
It's crazy long. And it
by the
depends
time
on-
it's going to get out of your system. Yeah. The other thing that I was not aware of that makes so much sense now is that lots of decaf coffees, they lie to you. They are not.
They have caffeine.
It's not
are
just
not-
trace.
Yeah.
It's more than trace. Like
some-
20, 30 grams in some
Exactly.
places.
And if I have this is like a K cup. I don't know which ones do it, which even makes it worse for me.
Yeah.
But I'll have 2 or 3 cups at night because I really like it.
Yeah.
And 30. So then you're getting 90 grams of caffeine right before bed.
Yep.
And then I've been to where you just kind of sit and you're like, why am I not tired tonight?
I was actually just reading about this. I can't remember which ones have there's some that have 2 to 3 milligrams. So they're they're true. They're not true decaf still, but
they're
they're
way down.
very low down. But the majority of them actually have more than you'd think.
Well, then you
It's
have
just
to
they don't have
consider-
90, 200, something like that. But yeah.
And then how sensitive are you to caffeine?
Yeah.
I mean, was it CYP 1A or CYA 1P or 2P, based on the allele or how you respond to caffeine, that can further this issue.
Yep.
But it impacts everybody. So even if you think you're like, oh, I can sleep fine with caffeine, like I think in Why They Sleep, they talked about that. They hook stuff up to you and it impacts your sleep like caffeine. You can't just...
Habituation can mask it. Like you can think that you're
some
fine.
people, though, it does make them sleepy. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I don't. That's news.
There is a it's genetic, and I should have looked this up ahead of time. But some people, and it does the opposite. Instead of stimulate you, it brings you down.
Just makes
Crazy.
zero sense
I know.
to me.
And
I
I
can't even
think-
imagine how physiologically that works.
I don't know. The body is amazing.
Isn't it though? Isn't it?
Anyways, I would say if at night too, if you drink too much hot stuff, it can also make you kind of physically hot.
Oh yeah. I mean, we've talked about cooling core temperature with things you ingest. It's very effective, right?
Yeah. So the opposite works too. And if you want to have a hot drink at night, and you don't have any problems with getting core temperature, herbal teas, naturally decaf, like peppermint. Peppermint tea is not going to have any caffeine in it. They don't do a process of decaffeination, so you're fine. But like a black tea that's decaf, I would stay away from that.
And make it iced tea.
If you can.
You could do it, yeah.
If you
Yeah.
want
Yeah, I'm saying make it iced tea because I remember I rode to, we live in Reno, I rode to Carson City. It's like a 35-mile ride. Met my dad for breakfast, ordered hot coffee, and sat and sweat bullets the entire meal.
Yeah.
I come, it wasn't nearly as hard as a race either. And here I am sitting in basically a 70-degree temperature, drinking a hot drink, and my body will not wind down.
Yep.
So in terms of cooling, don't use hot drinks.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so back to the sleep topic. So I said, if I had to choose between nutrition or sleep, which would I emphasize? And it absolutely, emphatically, sleep. A quote from Matthew Walker: "The shorter you sleep, the shorter your life." And it sounds like it is a strong statement. He bases that on 20 large-scale epidemiological studies tracking millions of people over many decades, and where they recognize causal links to lack of sleep and heart disease, obesity, dementia, diabetes, cancer, all the bigs. They're all there, and they're all tied to sleep in one way or another. It's not to say lack of sleep causes these things, but it does them no favors.
Yep.
And if this is the case, then when it comes to training adaptation, it's kind of a rob Peter to pay Paul sort of scenario. You're not going to benefit from hard training if you're going to shortchange the recovery process. So, and to further, to heap onto that, sleep deficiency actually reduces our growth hormone and elevates our cortisol levels.
Yep.
Neither of those things are desirable in terms of performance adaptation. Testosterone levels drop, which is going to have an impact on your bone density, on your muscle synthesis. I mean, again, not desirable in terms of training adaptation.
Yep.
So then on top of it, no endurance athlete wants to be fat or fatter, or have more unnecessary body fat, and lack of sleep increases this adiposity. So sleep deficiency, to put one word on it, mangles our appetite response. Leptin levels, which tell us we're full. Leptin levels, which tell us are full, go down. Ghrelin levels, which tell us we're hungry, go up. We get an increase in the release of internal cannabinoids, endocannabinoids, which, cannabis, it's right there in the word. These are the things that make increase appetite, increase likelihood of snacking. With these things, they're almost behavioral issues, though. So there is some level of conscious control. You can say, I recognize that I'm hungry, but I'm not going to eat. What is beyond our control consciously, though, is what happens in terms of that cortisol that I just mentioned and its effects on our microbiome. It can actually prevent proper nutrient uptake. So the food we're eating isn't even doing us all the service that it could do. In terms of insulin sensitivity, that is greatly reduced depending on the severity of our sleep deficit or our sleep deficiency. If you were to see your general practitioner after a few nights of bad sleep, you might actually get misdiagnosed or misclassified as pre-diabetic because your circulating blood glucose is so high because of this insulin sensitivity. And as a note, this is a good time to mention that general practitioners in Australia are apparently specialists. So I'm going to try to steer away from that term and use the term primary care provider from this point forward.
Cool.
Thank you to the Aussie who pointed that out to me.
Cool.
So
and then,
go ahead.
And then finally, just a couple short points. Lack of sleep compromises our immune response also, and that's obviously not favorable in terms of all the training stress we're already inflicting on our bodies and the challenges we're already issuing to our immune system. And these are not just short-term issues. These can last months to years. Bad sleep for an extended period of time can have a long-lasting impact. And then finally, we'll get to how it can impact your gene transcriptome. But that's the segue into the next question. But I figure we're going to talk about this a little more.
Yeah.
So, Chad, how much is enough sleep?
Typically, across studies, they seem to draw a line at about 7 hours. And that's not to say 7 hours is adequate in all situations either. Just that 7 hours, below 7 hours is where the wheels start to come off the wagon.
I thought,
Ideally,
was
they want
8?
8 to 9 hours.
Yeah.
But 7 is where it is that hard line where below it,
You start to
stuff
see
starts to go
bad
poorly.
effects.
All the studies, and anytime they talk about an increase in rate of heart disease or an increase in insulin sensitivity, et cetera, those come with 6 hours and less. So 7 hours is kind of the higher side of that, but ideally 8 or 9 hours.
With Walker,
especially with athletes. What
he argues in the Why We Sleep book is that they've looked at people who say, I can get by with 5.
No, they can't.
But they think they can.
But
it's like you're always in the fog, so you don't know
Yeah.
how well you can
difference.
perform.
Yeah.
And you're actually hurting your health.
It's just like a fatigued athlete who's always fatigued. They don't recognize the difference between feeling fresh and feeling fatigued.
And just getting one night's sleep where you get 8 hours, if you're in that rut, isn't just going to magically pull you out of that too.
Nope.
Like you said.
You can't repay sleep debt.
That's why perfect segue to what I was going to say. That's what Chad recommends to sleep rather than eat, is because you could repay eat debt.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
That's easy.
Yeah, you can make up
You
for
just
that.
eat a little bit
We're
more
all
in the
very
morning.
good at that,
Yeah,
actually.
exactly. Yeah.
And with all the ill effects that come with it, there are probably a couple of positive ones. You know, maybe you burn a little
right.
extra fat over the course of the evening.
So exactly, you could have less calories ingested over the week. So every night, this is how I understand it, Chad. Correct me if I'm wrong. For every night that you're not getting your 7 to 8 hours, you're damaging your body, and
In a
no
lot of
amount of
ways.
sleep in the future
fix
helps
it.
with that.
As
So-
I understand it, and as Matthew Walker puts it, and a number of other sleep experts put it, yes.
Yeah. You can feel less tired by, you sleep 3 nights one night, the next night you sleep 10 or 12. You'll feel less tired, but the damage you did does not get fixed.
You can put
later
yourself
on.
back on track, but yeah, the underlying damage is still there.
Yeah. So that's why we should always try to get that sleep.
Go for sleep.
And new
And
parents,
emphasize
sorry.
not just-
It's
I was just gonna say what this is laid out
students.
is that to not have children and to not party. Basically, that's like what I've learned from this, right? Like,
and to not go to medical school. That's one of the greatest crimes against sleep is these 24-hour rotations.
Or
And the stuff
kids.
they inflict on people who
The
need to
irony.
be like soaking things up intellectually.
The irony,
and they're
right?
challenging the brain. Oh, the irony.
we need them to be the sharpest that
So
they can
wrong.
be as well, and yeah, it's really tough. Yeah, but so just going back, Auntie, to your question, really like tips that you can do. So first thing that we talked about is getting your core temperature down, and you can do that through a number of different ways. Ingesting something that is cold rather than hot.
Don't do too much because you wake up in the middle of the night.
Yes, this is true.
Older men, you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Or just anybody with a bladder.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
It
Happens
was
to
different when
everybody.
I was 18.
Yeah. Then if you can, take a shower. It doesn't have to be crazy cold. You don't have to go Wim Hof or anything, but you can take a shower to be able to drop your core temperature down just a little bit. Even that cooling effect from a shower that's slightly warm.
I talked about
can
cold
help.
towels on the skin before. I mean, there are a lot of ways to bring your core temperature down. So then they're not restricted to or limited to
room,
what we've talked
fan.
about.
Yep, exactly. And then once again, so all of those things can help. Then just make sure that you're getting the sort of sleep that you need thereafter. Which in this case, if you're getting 8 hours, that's fantastic, Auntie, and keep
It
that
is
up.
and it isn't. I mean, it's
Sure.
8 hours, but what's the quality of those 8 hours? And that's
Sure.
something that's missed too often.
Yeah, good point. It's not just quality, or not
It's
just
not
quantity, it's
duration, yeah.
quality.
Yeah.
Okay, Jerry's question says, great podcast. I listen every week. Chad keeps saying that strength training and endurance workouts on the trainer don't mix well. Well, he's probably.
I picture people like doing shoulder press
while they're on the bike. Yeah. We've seen that in spin classes, right? So it says, does it make any difference if a person does a strength workout targeting the upper body and then does an endurance workout on the trainer, which of course primarily works the legs? Does the signaling that occurs affect the whole body or only the specific muscle groups involved? This is like once again, a question I'm sure all of us have had. Is it like a systemic thing or is it localized?
Yep. And I should preface this with the statement that I should preface every one of my answers with is I understand it.
Sure.
And I think I have a pretty good grasp on understanding this, and I do my fair share of reading, my due diligence. So, as I understand it, yeah, there are conflicting signals, but the signals are cell-specific. I mean, we talk about cell signaling all the time. It's right there in the name, cell signaling. We're talking specific cells. In the case of muscles, we're talking muscle fibers. That's a muscle cell, a myocyte. So the 10,000-foot view of cell signaling is we all begin as zygotes, right? Sperm and the egg, we're a zygote. At that moment, we contain all the DNA necessary, all the DNA we're ever going to contain.
Yep.
Cell division takes place. Every one of those cells contains all the DNA. So we're a perfect replication of that initial cell. Every cell contains the same genetic information. Doesn't matter what type of cell it is, whether it's a liver cell, a skin cell, a hair cell, same DNA is in there. But different cells use that information in different ways. Okay? So your genome is your DNA, whereas your epigenome is how you use your DNA. Okay, and again, 10,000-foot view, trying to be as simplistic as possible.
Yep.
Get a little more, a little finer, go to 1,000-foot view. This is a question of what we are genetically versus who we are expressively. And expression is the key term there because that's the term used when we're describing how we switch on and off our genes. And to be more accurate, it's actually how we dim or brighten them. So it's not a binary thing. It's degrees of. Typically, when we're talking about athletes, you'll hear gene expression in terms of protein expression. For our terms, they're synonymous. There is obviously a distinction, but for us, it might as well be the same thing. Dr. Catherine Shanahan, she wrote Deep Nutrition. She's very, very educated in the the realm of nutrition, and she also has a really good grasp on the realm of genetics. She describes genes as they're like tiny protein-producing machines that create different products. And what's so interesting about that is that we can influence how our genes modify themselves, what products they produce. So the information is always there. We have this effectively unchanging DNA blueprint, and it's not totally ironclad, but for our purposes, again, never changes. How we express that information, however, can be quite flexible. So, and how we do this is via any and every way we interact with our environment, from nutrients, the food we eat, to their timing, when we eat them, relative to exercise, for instance. Sleep, not just the duration, but also the quality of the sleep, the phases and how long you spend in these phases, et cetera. Exercise in its many, many forms, pollutants in their many, many forms, elevation at which you live, elevation at which you train, temperature at which you live, temperature at which you train, temperature at which you spend a day at the beach. All these things can impact the way we express our genome. So this makes our genotype, what our DNA says we can be, into our phenotype, what we decide to be, how we influence it. And when these influences change, we change with them. And sure, you may have a genetic, or I should just say a predisposition. That's genetic, and typically it's described as such, a genetic predisposition. But gene or protein expression comes in response to training, and this is where epigenetics figures into all of this. It's epigenetics that says you're a time trialer, you're a climber, you're a sprinter, because of the way you train, because of the way you talk to your genome, and the signals you choose to send, and the proteins you choose to express, whether or not you're conscious of that's what you're doing.
Something interesting along these lines in my 23andMe test, it said that I had like a predisposition, a genetic predisposition to be considerably overweight, right?
Yeah, predisposed to it, but your lifestyle says otherwise. Your lifestyle tells your body, tells your genome, no, that's not
Did
how
you just
we're
call
going
us
to do it.
skinny?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chad.
So that's like
In a loose sense.
so that's like a boots on the ground example of that, right? In the sense that you can have predisposition, but how you live also really affects things.
Yeah, genetics loads the gun, the environment pulls the trigger.
Cool.
That's the phrase.
Perfect. Yep.
I wish it were mine. It's not.
Yeah.
Okay, so and that's all for now. I was going to dive into mTOR and AMPK, and that's a much bigger topic, and I would really like to distill it down to what's useful. I could go on it for a while and probably butcher some things, get a lot of things right, but probably provide you with too much detail. So I'm going to save that for later.
Let's dig it. Let's tie it back into Jerry's question.
Yeah. So the takeaway is you can have both, but you can't have them in the same cell, at least not optimized. So if you decide to train the same muscle groups with endurance and also with strength training, you're never going to be the best strength athlete or the best endurance athlete. You're going to be, somewhere in between, potentially good versions of both, not great versions of either. So if you think of, for instance, telling your upper body that you want strength and doing strength work, telling your lower body that you want endurance and getting on the bike, you're similar to every triathlete that you see running around carting excess upper body mass. That's probably a lot of what they're doing. They're doing strength work upstairs, endurance work downstairs, and they've made it work. Not the best endurance athlete they could be, not the best strength athlete they can be, but probably pretty good and probably a pretty well-rounded human
They look
individual.
nice too.
And they look good
exactly.
on top of it. Yeah. So the body's not dedicated to a single aim. There's nothing wrong with that, unless, of course, you want to be a world tour rider or a top-level strength athlete. So it just depends on what you tell your bodies, how you choose to express your DNA.
Yeah. So I guess going within that, though, that doesn't mean, I guess one way you could say that is like, well, then I should never strength train if I'm trying to be an endurance athlete.
Definitely not.
But there are benefits outside of that you get with the moderate amount of strength training that you would do that wouldn't detract from the endurance side, right?
Absolutely. And there are ways to, we've talked about how you position your strength training relative to your endurance training so that you maximize the signaling of one before you impede it with the signaling of the other.
Yeah, so it's all about
just separate them. Basically, it's quite simple. Simple, and you can. There's data to support that you can do low-level endurance training, couple that with strength training, and not have that strong of a conflict between those two sets of signals.
What about say I'm doing a TrainerRoad workout, then immediately afterwards I do bench press. Is that messing it up if I'm not doing anything with the legs?
I don't know why it would. I can't imagine why it would.
Yeah, because the mTOR and AMPK, which we'll talk about later, is separate.
Different fibers, getting different messages, manifesting different proteins, different expression, transcription.
But if I did
replication,
separate channels.
If I did TrainerRoad workout and then I did heavy squats, that's where
That's a huge conflict.
Yeah, exactly.
You're telling your muscles, I want one thing, and then immediately after you're telling them, I want exactly the opposite.
Poor muscles.
You're so confusing.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Nate, before we get into any other questions, one thing that we want to talk about here is something that we've just released last week. It's been awesome.
Thanks for waiting for me.
Yeah, the reception's been great on this so far, by the way. You can go to the forum and check this out. You can also enable this. What I'm talking about is Plan Builder. So basically, this is an automated training plan builder for you that takes you from wherever you're at to peak fitness. It's something we're super excited about. People that have been using it, it's an early access now. And what we mean by early access is the fact that you can actually go into your TrainerRoad account. And when you click on your account online, then there's an area where you can click early access. And then you can enable features. And I would check that somewhat frequently because sometimes we enable things and you can turn them on. So it's kind of cool.
But
that's...
You're going to give people we'll tell you usually.
Sure, yeah.
On the
We'll
forum
tell you.
usually.
Yeah, it's not like we're going to be covert about this.
Yeah.
And sneak something by you.
A couple hours check.
It's a cool thing to be able to do and to get some early access into this. So if you go to the forum, there's a big long post on there where we announced it, and then we're going through and talking to a bunch of people, and people are sharing their experiences with using it. And coming from that, we wanted to go through here and touch on a couple points that we found, like educational points that will really help everybody as they go through this.
So it's in early access, and at the moment, early access too is a fancy way of saying beta. We're testing it, so there are some bugs. And what we noticed, the thread has 570
it's a lot.
posts like this morning. There's going to be more after this. And a lot of them were questions about why are we building the plan a certain way. So we wanted to cover this here so that Chad can just tell everybody. Yeah. And that's probably more people hear it than respond to everyone in the forum.
Yeah, and one thing with this too, one of the firm principles that we adhere to here is constant improvement. We believe in constantly getting better. This is why Chad's always researching. It's not like Chad's I've coached many athletes in the past and I'm good. Yeah. Chad's always researching. We're always improving in everything that we do. And Plan Builder is a huge step for us and always improving how all of you can get faster. But Plan Builder itself will always improve and will always improve everything that we do.
I see this along the same lines as the ramp test. I mean, we recognized a challenge. We came up with some really good ideas and how to surmount that challenge, and we had a ton of data to help us shape that design. And we came out with a really good product, and we've done it again.
So what John is doing as a disclaimer is the stuff that we're going to tell you now, we reserve the right to improve it in the future.
Exactly. It may change, right?
Well, hopefully it gets better and better and better until it is the best.
Right. Of course.
I don't know. It's like you approach the limit but never reach the limit. It's 99.9, 99.999.
Exactly.
So anyways.
Can we start with the objective of the whole thing?
Yes. So what you do.
The whole thing is built around your events, right?
Yep. Depends.
Sure.
So there's different ways. One is you put in your races, and then it builds out the plans for you. And before, the problem was if you had exactly 28 weeks, it was easy. Base build specialty, bam. But even there, kind of confusing. I'm doing a gravel race. What should I do? And this product answers those questions for you. But what if you had 27 weeks? What if you had 51 weeks? All these sort of things. That is the objective. And also, if you don't have an event and you say, I want to be just generally fit, we will build that plan for you also.
Sure.
Because we get this question a few times in the podcast.
Maybe once.
It's our number one question to support.
Yes, it is.
So
it's very
download
common.
Chad's brain, put it in these things. And now Chad's going to explain his brain a little bit.
Yeah, and it really is it's even if you don't have an event, you still kind of pick a discipline that you want to do. But let's just assume in this case that you do have an event.
Yep.
It's really what it all builds toward, right? Your A event, right, Chad?
Okay. So the first question, we've got a lot on, is sometimes it will go base build, specialty.
Yeah.
Why is that?
So a couple of reasons, really. One is to prevent stagnation. If we just made base, in this case, 8, 8, 8, and 8,
sure.
12, 12, 12, and 12, that gets boring. It gets boring really fast. It's also not enough stimulus to keep your body adapting. So stagnation was one thing we wanted to avoid. It's also easier to maintain the escalation of your TSS if you're doing base and build, because if you've noticed, as you probably have noticed if you've ever done a specialty plan, TSS dips. So this wouldn't maintain that upward fitness trajectory, because now with specialty plan, we're shaping fitness for a specific event. But if you don't have a specific event right there, it doesn't make sense to specialize. There's nothing to specialize for. You save that for later. You have to butt that closely up to your event.
Sure.
So we push you back into base build. But when you return to base build again, you're doing it with a higher level of fitness, a higher FTP. So it's just another step along the way, another step up the pyramid, or now you're working on a higher playing field.
Yeah.
And doing 3 builds in a row would destroy you.
It'd be really tough.
It's the same thing. Stagnation and the stimulus is too similar. Not to mention it's hard. So we go back to base. We dial things back down a bit. You're starting it again at a higher level. Carry that into your next build, which you start at a higher level than your previous build. Yeah. Then you specialize with 2 layers of fitness instead of 1.
Yeah, as long as your plan is solidly based on scientific principles and it's progressing you in a proper direction. As you're moving through this and you're getting fitter and you're going through it, you're improving and it's making you faster. But there's a bit of I think a lot of the disconnect exists for some people because in many cases, base build and specialty seems as if it is mandatorily sequential, right? But in this case, what we're talking about is just trying to get you the most fit we possibly can.
Yeah.
Right? That's the goal.
Putting the blocks together when the time isn't 28 weeks.
Yep.
So what happens, and I've done this, and just about everyone does this, you look at it and you're like, okay, I'm going to do base, I'm going to do 4 builds. Actually, what I'll just do is I'm going to do 2x20 and then VO2 max efforts, and then I'm going to do 2 5-hour rides on the weekend, and then every week I'm going to up my FTP by 2 watts, and then by the time I get to my rent, I'm going to have a 400 watt FTP, and it's going to be amazing.
Sure.
Right?
If only.
I mean, that's what because people are like, why would you put me back to base after I did build? I want to keep going. Like, give me more build.
You are keeping going.
Exactly. But in your mind, you want to do this really hard stuff. And the number one thing is consistency.
Yes.
And if we throw you against the wall, the worst thing, have you guys done this where 4 to 8 weeks before your event, you do not want to train?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard. Because then it's like the worst spot to be in because you have time that you need to fill productively, but you're just...
And you need to rest.
Yes.
It is the worst. And burning people out with too much stuff in a row.
Yep.
That's why it doesn't go build, special.
A build would burn you out.
Yeah. So that is why this happens. So just trust us like this is better for you, or trust Chad. Next question. This is the same lines. We have time for 4 blocks. It might go base, build, base, specialty. Some people say, I just answered the question, why don't you do 2 specialties in a row? Or why don't I do 2 builds in a row?
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same ideas that we just talked about. In this case, I like returning to sweet spot base because it targets the big hitters, the muscle endurance through the sweet spot work, and then the VO2 max stuff is introduced in the second half of that. So it hits the things that are most fundamental to making you faster and to setting you up and putting you in the perfect spot for specialty. So even though it didn't get super specific with build, you already have that. It's already in there. So you've already raised that playing field. So now you're going to go back to base, build some more muscle endurance and a higher aerobic capacity and bring that into your specialty. It doesn't always have to funnel perfectly in line.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Now, there's another scenario where somebody has a ton of time. Let's say they have 40 weeks, something like that, right? Yeah, 2 years. And in that case, one of the questions that I've seen is a person saying I'm going through and doing base build and specialty, and then I'm going through and doing a truncated version of that thereafter. Why am I doing the specialty phase in that case when you're talking about a super long time?
Yeah, because in that case, we put you through the whole 28-week cycle, and that basically cultivates a base, a really amazing base, a really well-covered, all aspects covered base. And then we do a truncated version of that as almost a touch-up cycle. It's definitely not a taper, but everything you need is already there. Now we're just going to make each of those things a little bit better.
Yeah.
With a shorter version of the entire trajectory that you've already completed. It's all there. It's all in place. And if you move straight from the full BBS to the truncated BBS or the full cycle to the truncated cycle, there was never a lapse in your training. You're simply on an upward trajectory.
Yeah, and once again, remember, you're getting fitter as this whole thing is happening. And the other side of this, too, is that the specialty phase will allow you to pick up on a little bit of freshness because that's a long time to keep going, right?
And that's a large component of specialty phases.
Is
to prime you, to give you, this is part of the reason why the TSS dips. We need to freshen you up. We need to put you in a state where you're ready to compete, where you're chomping at the bit.
Yep. Can I tie it back to events really quick? Because I know this is another question that we had. David, one of our product managers, is bringing up that this is kind of a common one. So when you have an A event and you place it as your A event, that's the objective. Plan Builder is locked on to making you as fit as you can be for that event.
That's the end point, yeah.
Right. So that's when you'll see that you'll have a taper built into that. It has the whole strategy all around that. Now with your B and C events, a lot of the time, and this is kind of we see this commonly, a big question of just not quite prioritizing your events can be hard. Part of it is can be a lack of knowledge, but a lot of it
all
is self-control, right?
They're all
I just
A.
want to win them all.
And to some
can
extent,
try to-
that's true.
you can
They're
try
all
to win them
important,
all.
but they're
Yeah.
not all A. You have to.
You
Yeah.
can't taper
It's
all year
priority.
round.
It's not important. It's priority.
Yes.
Which one is the highest priority?
And you can try to win them all.
Yeah.
You can try to win a C event.
Sure. Absolutely. Right. So, and I'll just give like a quick refresher on C and B, and then we'll talk about what Plan Builder does for those. So like a C event is something that you can typically train through. It's low consequence, and it's
Like you do
something
train
that
through.
You
yeah.
do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Basically swap out a workout in lieu of it.
Yep, and that's what Plan Builder does in this case with it, right? So, and a C event, like giving you an example of C events, those are like the weekly races I do. It may even be like a race series that's on the weekend. If it just doesn't have specific application or is far enough away in terms of timeline from my goal event, I'm not going to prioritize that event and treat it as anything other than another workout. So
No
to
taper,
speak.
no days off. You just roll right through it.
Yep. And that doesn't mean that it has to be a short race. It could be a gravel ride, right? But I'm not planning on just, going as crazy hard as I can, whatever else it may be. It's not event duration dependent. It's once again, the priority in relation to your main goal. Now, a B event is something that you actually want to, whether it's you want to replicate some aspect of what you'll be doing on race day, whether it's a similar course, whether it's close to enough to your event that you'll be utilizing, the current fitness you have will be similar to what you'll have on your event.
Or it's just a race
One you
that
value more.
Yes, that you
Exactly.
could be so your A might be nationals, but you need to get like results or call-ups, or you just want to beat Chad in a race.
That's
You
what
do
they
B,
make A plus for
and then
me.
it adds it adds a little bit of rest before, and then you have a choice to add an opener or not.
Yeah, so that's what Plan Builder does.
Yep.
So yeah, which is nice. You can move that little switch. You can just click that and it'll add openers, which is really awesome beforehand. Like an example of a B event for me, I have even our state championships as a B event that we'll have, right?
Yeah.
Those are B events for me because my A event is national championships. That's my pinnacle. And I try to be selective. I have the next day, or we'll see, 2 days after, I'll have another national championship, but it's short track and it's not exactly my main goal. So I'm not putting that down as an A event. I'm putting that down lower. I'm being disciplined in that regard. And you can have multiple A events with Plan Builder. You just have to make sure they're spaced out adequately in order to allow yourself the time. And Plan Builder has those constraints built into it to make sure that you're doing that.
Yeah, anytime you have several A events on a calendar, you probably need to get a little more differentiating.
For sure. Yeah.
That's because that brings me a segue into my next thing. The events, we do a taper for it. And I just saw this question too on the forum. Someone said, why are you having me do these intense workouts the week of my A event? But if you look at it, it was like, I think Huxley, but it was like -5. It was 30 minutes and it was
Short
like
version.
38 TSS. And you had been doing, this was I think on the low volume plan, 300 TSS a week. And you went down to like 120 or 130.
Yeah.
So the thought, the whole idea behind this for the taper is you're still intense, especially for these like crits and rolling road race where it's going to be punchy, but your volume is just much lower and you recover much better from it.
It's a sharp reduction in the volume. That's what brings about the freshness, but we can't get away from that intensity. You still have to maintain that edge. You still have to be familiar with that sort of work. Those systems still need to be firing on all cylinders. You can't neglect them.
Yep. 100%.
One other thing I want to talk about is
Sure.
too with the base build specialty and like ramping it back. I just saw somebody, they said, okay, first year with TrainerRoad, got a 100-watt increase in my FTP noob games, but questioning our system because now he's tired.
Okay.
Like he or she.
Sure.
Um, Yeah, you're going to be tired.
Fatigue is a thing.
Like I did too many intervals, but yes, you're going to be tired. Take that rest time. I would argue then if you do it again, like first off, we got a tough crowd, man. 100-watt FTP increase.
Yeah, exactly.
Seriously.
That's pretty great.
Sure what more you expect.
They wanted to train to a different like training system. But like do it again and be a little less tired during the year. Like try to do these bouncing back and forth. Like just use Plan Builder pretty much so that you can stay a little bit fresher. Maybe you'll be less tired at the end of the year. But if you do the same amount of volume, but you'll still see some kind of FTP increase, but you'll be a lot less tired at the same amount of volume.
Yep. Yeah. Cool. Ready to get into some live questions?
Yeah.
Let's
Feels
do
like
that
a
to
short
cap it off.
podcast.
Yeah, it's
Should we go
kinda
2 more
short for
hours?
you. Yeah.
Would you get like 45 minutes in?
Sorry, everybody.
So these are the live questions that you can submit when you join us on YouTube, and we'd love to have you join us. We'll be here this next week on Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific for that. First one is from Cunio. Says, "Hi guys, what type of training plan do you recommend for obese people who want to get weight down before focusing on FTP? I'm doing mainly zone 2 endurance work only to lose," it says, "from 142 kilograms to 125 kilograms." This is like so there's like two parts to this. I see the what should I do before I start really training? That's like
Training to train.
Yeah, exactly. That's a big thing that a lot of people say, like, I don't want to just get into it yet. Just want to do something beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other side of it, what sort of work is best to lose weight, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are kind of like the two things that I pull out of that.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with doing some pre-work. Like with weight training, there's like an adaptive period where people will do some lighter stuff to brace them for the harder stuff to come. And it's a fine way to go, but it's not a necessity.
Right.
You don't have to train to train. You don't have to bring any more fitness than you already have, and that might be none, to the table. You can start from scratch. We assess your fitness, see where it is, and then go from there. And we start everybody out with sweet spot base.
Yep.
Well, depending, but that's typically where people start out.
Yep.
And that's a great place to start. The type of work that it has you doing right from the very start is something you can do. Maybe you'll find that being new to indoor training, maybe the workouts are a little long. Hour-long workouts for riders who are new to indoor riding can seem interminably long.
Sure.
That will only last for so long.
Yep.
Just do what you can in the moment and understand that you will improve. And you don't have to start with any pre-training. You can dive right in.
Yeah. One thing that we've talked about just recently, a couple episodes ago, I think in 234, was the fact that kind of the myth of the fat burning zone, that if you stay in zone 2,
that's another thing.
You know, that's where you'll burn fat. And if you step outside of that, you don't burn fat.
Nope, that's not true. But you can do a lot of the low intensity training and burn fat the whole time.
Sure.
But you have to, first off, have the time. And it's just one way of burning fat. And well, like I just said, it's very time consuming.
Yep.
So a ton of fat is being burned with interval training. A ton of fat is being burned post interval training. So it's an effective way to go, but it requires a lot of time, and it's only one of several ways to go.
Yep. Cunio, is that how you say it? So this is, my advice would be to, it's like this, and this can be a little personal, find the balance where you can restrict your calories enough where you can maintain it on that, like one side. That's the most important part. And then 2, do as intense and as much volume as you can to be able to maintain that. And maybe that is Z2 workouts, because you find like on this maybe I'm a 1,000 calorie or 500 calorie deficit a day. I can't do anything higher than that, but maybe you can. So I would try it.
For sure.
But I wouldn't be working to fuel your workouts. If you're in obese state that you want to go, I like Z. It sounds like you're getting up wrong with Z2. I wouldn't raise my calories in order to do more,
especially not.
intense
So
intervals.
that's one thing that Z2 work does not facilitate or does not accommodate. You can't be pouring sugar into the system if the goal is to build aerobic endurance and also reduce body weight or body fat. So low intensity rides, that is one upside of them. You don't really need to nourish them. You can get away with quite a lot of work before that nourishment becomes crucial. But you do sweet spot work, you're probably going to need some nourishment if the rides are in the
Maybe
ballpark.
not though.
Maybe not. I've done
I found
90s.
that the heavier I am, like the easier they are.
Yeah.
And then when I get like skinnier, they're
Tough. You have
they're
to fuel.
tougher.
90-minute sweet spot workouts, I can get through those after an overnight fast. Pretty much no problem.
Chad's Chad.
Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of people can do.
Your
can do
mileage
that
may
very
vary.
thing.
Yeah, exactly. And Chad reads textbooks while he does that as well, listening to classical
Most of the
music.
time, not
Remember
all the
this. Steve says, when to work on sprinting. Does it make sense to work on sprinting during the off season, not just technique, but building up power? Or should it be reserved for fine-tuning during the race season?
I can't think of any good reason to do it off season if you're just focused on sprint power, because that's power that can be trained up really rapidly and it goes away really rapidly. So unless you're going to stay on top of it all the way to the pivotal races, I would save it until 8 weeks out, 4 to 8 weeks out. Depending.
Technique though, different.
Technique you can work on anytime.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Let's.
You can cultivate good sprint fitness 2 weeks out.
Yeah, absolutely. John says, gear question. When using a 29-inch hardtail mountain bike for a gravel grinder, any suggestions for gravel-specific tires? The course is 40% road, 50% gravel, and 10% trail. So this is actually kind of like the Franken bike that all of us have wanted to build for a while, right? Like having like a hardtail mountain bike, which Chad actually might be doing.
I am doing.
So hardtail mountain bike, but then you have drop bars on it basically. And now that SRAM's Eagle Axis exists, that makes it really easy to do it with like a wide range drivetrain, which is pretty handy too. So then you can have like a 1050, and then you can just have their road shifters. And since they all speak the same wireless language, now it works. It was complex before because of different indexing between mountain bike and road systems a lot of the time, so you couldn't quite match up. And even though gravel setups are getting a little bit wider in terms of range in the back, they're not quite to the mountain bike level yet. So anyways, that's the exciting thing. Tires though, Nate, you are known as the tire guy, making lots of tire choices all the time.
Bike shop.
Yeah.
But I don't know what's the best. That's why I keep changing.
Of course, exactly. Constantly searching out the best options.
For my choice on this one, I would do the Vittoria. Oh, this is if it's a hard pack, dry, or loose over hard. Not if it's muddy or loam or something like that. But
yeah,
you're probably not doing that. It would be the Vittoria Terreno Dry. Maybe we put a picture of that tread up. I put the Tucker a link in the podcast notes, and in theirs they have 31, 33, and 38C. I would probably do, depending on how bad the gravel and single track is, either 33 or 38. If the gravel is just easy, I would probably do 33 for the road, and then thank you, there they are. And then if it's like I've done, what did I do? I did some huge gravel thing that on a 38C, Secondo, I think.
Yes,
and it was amazing.
Yep.
It rolls really well on the pavement, and I actually would use these for cross too. The 31s or the 33s, depending on if it's grass or loose or something like that.
I'd use something, so depending on like your kind of abilities and the abilities of, since you have a hardtail mountain bike, the geometry should be a little bit better. But the more capable the bike, if you have tires that are less capable, that will become more pronounced, so to speak, in some regards, because you may be expecting something different and you're kind of undergunning it, so to speak. So it really depends on your abilities. One tire that if you are worried about traction on the gravel stuff and the trail stuff and worried about stability and everything, the WTB Riddler, we've used that one. It's pretty darn good, but you will sacrifice some on the paved sections for sure. But it's got like micro knobs down the center. They're really small. Another one that you could use is, and these are just from WTB, ones that I've used, the WTB Byway. That one would be if you're more worried about the roadside and being efficient. Sorry, Tucker, not dropping in the links right here.
He's going in fast.
He's finding it. So I think that the one that he's pulling up right now is the Byway, and you can see that it's kind of like a semi-slick, in the sense that on top it has like a full slick pattern across the top, textured quarter zones, so to speak, or third zones, and then like on the shoulder knobs it actually has some knobs. They aren't going to be the sort of knobs that really save you from falling, but they'll help for sure. And then another one that's kind of like an in-between the Riddler, one that might be a little bit more meaty than the Riddler is the WTB Venture. The Venture is like has a bit more grip to it for sure, but it has a pretty smooth rolling patch across the top. So tires, man, it's like it's fascinating. And if you're ever at like a race and there is a tire company there, if you're a nerd like the rest of us are, I recommend talking to them about like what makes certain tread patterns work, because you can really like start to understand certain things and see different characteristics. Like looking at the WTB Venture, it has knobs that are on the sides, but then they're gapped out pretty substantially. And then they have these intermediate knobs that are smaller in between there. So that makes me know, I know that tire but I assume that tire beforehand looking at it, it's not going to have outstanding lock-in when you lean over on the side, but it's going to be really predictable because it has that transition instead of just like a harsh. The WTB Riddler, on the other hand, has like slicks and then big knobs.
Transition.
So they'll feel like they lock in really well, but it won't be as predictable in the transition over to leaning over.
I'm already confused. What's the one with the thing in the middle? The road?
So there's the let me put Byway.
Okay, so here's my thought to put these together.
Yep.
Byway, best for road.
Yep.
Like I'm gonna go road to loosest.
Sure.
Then I would probably do the Vittorio Trento Dry.
Sure.
Then I would do the Riddler. In my experience, the Riddler's better like for loose stuff than the Trento Dry, but the Trento Dry is better on road.
Yep.
And then I would do the Venture.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
kind of the step depending on how your course is.
Sure. Yep. If you're doing something with 40% road, I really like.
It's a lot of road.
It's a lot of road. That's like the Segundo had a lot of road in
Mm-hmm.
it when we did it there. So that was So you don't want to shoot yourself
It's
in
that
the foot there.
10% trail that gets you,
I know.
right?
They always throw it
'Cause
in.
That could be.
And that
really-
kind of makes it fun, though. Makes it like a
For you.
Nate doesn't like it.
Well,
But
I mean-
I like the fact that it makes people pick like kind of like compromising equipment choices.
Why is
So
that fun?
It's
It's like,
just
oh,
interesting.
my stuff's gonna suck at everything, and then people are like, "That's so much fun!" Like, why not just do it all gravel and then it's fun? I can
It's
see the
just
gravel road, but adding that trail, especially if it's technical and like it's gonna scare you,
Sure.
like you're just sliding down this thing.
It's just a
annoying.
fun thing to be able to like sit back and make the equipment choices. I don't know. It's
Yeah,
fun.
but
I like that.
from the people who I've heard say this,
Yeah.
they have incredible technical skills, right? So they could probably go down on a road bike on slicks and like, wow, that was fun.
Yeah.
But all of us who gets like, or sometimes it gets so technical that it gets like fear inspires us.
Sure.
Like then we're like, oh, we could do a mountain bike with 2.3-inch tires, but then the road's gonna suck. But then I'll have fun on the 10% trail.
Yeah.
Right? Like, have you ever heard anyone who is questionable, like not at your level? Like the person I'm thinking
Yeah,
of that I've
I
heard this from
haven't.
is at your level.
Yeah, I haven't. No.
Yeah.
I like it.
I'm sure you do. The road gravel part, that's cool.
Sure.
Like
Yeah,
that's in Belgian waffle, that's a good trade off.
Yeah.
But it's when you do the single track.
I know I'm in the minority here.
Yeah.
So
it's like,
yeah.
and we're gonna go down North Star, Vietnam at the same
Yeah,
time.
exactly.
Well, that sounds like fun.
All right, last question, and then we'll end it for this week. This is one that I think Jacek, you may have been you may be in the watching this every week because I think I see this question come up every week. So I apologize if we haven't addressed it yet. But quick question: does pelvic tilt affect cycling efficiency? And this one's kind of hard to just provide like a quick answer to. But we've talked about this many times in terms of pelvic
Movement
tilt.
economy.
Yeah, yeah, cycling efficiency are the words that
I
are
don't really
used right
answer
here.
that. Like, if you're like at this angle versus this angle?
Exactly, right? Like
If it's gonna change
tilted
the
forward or
efficiency?
tilted backward.
Yeah, I think probably talking about movement economy. I mean, just how well you pedal, the form with which you pedal.
Sure.
We're not talking about energy.
I mean,
Substrate,
cycling
energy to
efficiency is the
output.
words that are used. So it's
Yeah,
up
I
to
can
you,
only,
Chad.
I can only guess. Just to say that pelvic tilt is a bit subjective. I mean, I had my days where I thought everyone should have their sit bones firmly anchored to the saddle in all situations, but I've since learned that a lot of people don't have low backs that will accommodate that. If the change in their body position, whether they get into the drops or they're on the tops or they're different types of bikes, will influence how much they can get away with. So I honestly don't know if it changes efficiency. I mean, if it forces you to ride in a way that doesn't really serve you and is wasteful in any way, then yeah, it's absolutely going to have an effect. But I don't think there's one particular pelvic tilt that is going to work across the board and make everyone the most economical rider possible.
This is like the nebulous world of like a lot of the thing that kind of shakes confidence in a
fitting.
lot of bike fit deals. When people go in, I know Nate, like I think maybe it was you where you've gotten bike fits and they've kind of like. They kind of don't do a whole lot in terms of change. You've paid a lot for bike fits, right? Like going to different ones.
I've been one where they just put a shim in one of my saddles and that's all they touched.
Yeah. In one of your shoes, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's just because they wanted to do something.
Yeah.
It was like a half of a millimeter shim. They're like, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
$250.
To the other point where they put me in a position where I'm like, I can't hold this like more than 15 seconds. And they're like, you'll get used to it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of like, and I've heard a lot of really hard and fast statements made about pelvic tilt with bike fitters where they say like, if you're not at this angle, it's wrong. If you're, and the thing is, it is different for every person. The one thing I can say is that if you do have something that's like extreme on one side or the other, like, you're always folded really far forward. Your pelvis is rolled forward, or you can't maintain a forward position if you have to. Well, something like that.
And there's all sorts of trades that have to be made to change pelvic position, to accommodate pelvic changes.
Yeah. Usually it's fair to say, this is only my observation, but it's fair to say that an extreme for like bike fit, if you're talking about like a hard and fast rule that pushes you far against the wall on one side of the extremes, in most cases is not going to be the best approach. But who knows? You may be like an outlier and it may be what you need. But in most cases, I find that bike fits tend to be pretty similar, or I should say the human body rests in a pretty similar position with individual variants all throughout. So it's tough. I wish that there was an answer to be able to say like, this is the ideal bike fit. And when you do this, it unlocks 15% more power. It'd be great because we'd all have it. But
Unfortunately, no.
no, it's just not quite that way. anything else to add, Nate?
I'm just thinking, like, if the question was around, like, will my mechanical efficiency change based on my pelvic tilt?
That's why I wanted to.
Yeah, and I don't know of any
trying to split hairs.
studies that have shown that. Like,
No.
And I bet you whatever.
There might be cadence. There are cadence-based ones, but not pelvic placements.
What I would think is whatever you're in and you change, you might be less efficient at first, but you probably adapt to it.
Yes.
So that I would question a study with that too, unless someone did it for a very long time.
Yeah, because everybody will be less efficient at first because they
Yeah,
just
exactly.
aren't
You
used
change
to
your
working
position.
in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is why it's really tough. Like whenever,
know.
like man, if I was a snake oily bike fitter, it'd be really easy, right? Like to kind of work those avenues. But just the same, hopefully that helps a bit. Don't worry too much about it. Instead, focus on hitting your marks with your training. That's probably where you're going to get a bigger bang for your buck. So,
If you're comfortable on your saddle, you probably don't need to change much.
sure. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can join us next week. That's going to be Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific, and we will be answering more of the cycling and triathlon related questions. Head over to TrainerRoad.com/reviews and leave a review if you use TrainerRoad and love it. Check out Plan Builder. You're going to love it. Nate, you've got something to add?
We're going to interrupt. Greg Dumanoir. I can't remember.
Dumanoir.
He just asked, Chad, what will you have for your last meal? Does he know something that I don't know?
My last meal.
Yeah.
Oh, so like if you were, I've heard this question, like if you were going to have your last meal, what would it be?
Oh.
That's what he's talking
Yeah,
about.
so let's say if someone found the bodies and you got, you're on death row.
They'll never find them.
They'll never find him, he says.
I'm very thorough.
If you're, sorry for interrupting, but
Sure.
I just saw
Why not?
who it was from and it was a,
Greg is a friend of the podcast. Thanks, Greg, for all that you do to help out.
I can't quickly answer that. I'd have to give it some thought.
You don't know?
I would need my several months on death row to really.
does it involve Popeyes?
Yeah, most certainly.
Because by then you don't care, right? Chad's like, it's bad for your health.
I don't care if it tastes good though, and I've never.
Ooh, you got to try that new Popeyes chicken sandwich, which I did.
I do. I have to.
It's good.
It's not a have to, actually. It's not a
definitely
need.
not a have to.
Yeah, not a need. Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.